Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Tuesday, April 9th, 2019. My name is Michael Brooks on the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Sam welcomes their hatred. I'm just playing. It's a pre-recorded debate slash... Actually, I haven't listened to it, but it sounded like very civil discussion.
Just a free exchange of ideas.
Free exchange,
exactly.
But actually like an actual one.
In the spirit of the Enlightenment.
In the spirit of the Enlightenment Project. Between Glenn Greenwald and Sam Seder. Hopefully the last time we'll cover the Russia story on this show. Though probably not. This was a good conversation. Picking some things apart. This was recorded last Friday, so it's still hot off of the presses. And then the team will take over in the fun half, and we will talk about a judge blocking Donald Trump's policies of sending asylum seekers back to Mexico, even as there is an administration purge of ICE calling for even more vicious, vindictive, and vicious policies and family separations. In Brexit news, Theresa May still looking to pivot her way out of this crisis and avert an election.
Kate McKinnon still portraying people like Theresa May somewhat favorably.
Yes,
Oh, really?
Queen. She's trying her best, okay?
Oh my God. Get the fuck out of here. Oh, I'm sorry. Wrong show for swearing. But that is pathetic.
We're sorry, we'll be better.
I mean, Theresa May is if you look at Windrush, she can go head-to-head with Donald Trump on anything. But anyways, yeah, go do silly Saturday Night Live sketches about her. Why do you guys get me angry, even in the show setup? USB drive found at a jail Mar-a-Lago party crasher contained self-executing code.
Shove that baby straight into...
Gunshots and tear gas fired at Sudanese protesters, but the military is playing an ambiguous role, echoing the Egyptian uprising of 8 years ago. The State Department identifies and bans 16 people in the roles of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, but MBS is not one of them. Democratic reps are pressing for civilian official counts of civilian casualties in Yemen, as the Trump administration promised a veto on the Sanders-Connell legislation to end U.S. support for the mass murder there. This past weekend marked the first-year anniversary of the political imprisonment of Lula da Silva, and tens of thousands marched not only in Brazil but across the globe, and he published an op-ed in Brazil's largest newspaper. We'll have some footage from that and read from his op-ed, all that, and a little bit more on today's Majority Report. How's everybody doing?
Yeah, pretty okay.
Whoa, that's
Start of the week still.
Strikingly non-peppy for you, Jamie. Are you all right? What's going on?
Well, our insurance ran out, so I haven't been able to pick up my Vyvanse, so I'm a little bit sleepy.
Ooh, that does sound
The pharmacological explanation from Jamie.
Pharmacological explanation from Jamie. Matt?
It's Tuesday. Once Tuesday's over, smooth sailing.
Really? Wednesday's the tough day for me. Brendan, how are you?
I was going to ask Matt if he's going up on a Tuesday, throw it back to 2015. You remember that song?
No.
No? All right. Well, someone in the chat or online will.
This is Normie Brendan coming through.
Normie Brendan coming through.
Real world pop culture.
Normie Brendan.
Normie Brendan. I saw in some of the
good.
Norm votes, Brendan was always the clear leader. I was usually following Brendan, although there was some competition between you and I, Matt. And then Sam and Jamie were rounding out the edges of least
You know,
normie.
I
Which
have
is
a
not a-
life outside
This is like
of
having.
politics.
I'm sorry. This is like having the loudest whisperer contest, guys. We are
This is
very
like
much in a
being
bubble,
the
far
best
afield from normie
skier
culture.
in Florida, the best snowboarder in Hawaii. All right, let's deal with this. Meghan McCain's getting spicier by the day. She's straight disrespecting Joy. Let's think about this for a second. On The View, you have Whoopi Goldberg, who's an iconic actress and comedian who's been working since the 1980s. Then what is her name? Sunny Hostin, who I believe is an attorney, in addition to being a talk show host. Then we have Joy Behar, who's I've been doing talk shows for, at least well over a decade. And I think she was also a stand-up comic. I don't know all of Joy's biography, but the point is some very accomplished people who have gotten there through their merit. Then there's two daughters of prominent Republican politicians. At least Abby Huntsman sort of has the sense. Somebody pointed this out on Twitter. Like Abby Huntsman at least is kind of like, hey, you know what? Let me at least like pretend to be pleasant. Meghan McCain is maybe the most bratty person that I have like encountered in any form, real or virtual, who is like above 5 years old. It's kind of mind blowing. And
Joy was here's some
what is
backstory.
Joy's? I love Joy. I want to know more about her background.
Joy was born to a truck driver father and a seamstress mother.
Oh.
She got her start in show business as a receptionist at Good Morning America and has been building her career for decades since then.
So if Meghan McCain
that's
was born
that's
to
Jeanette
a
Cordova on
truck
Twitter.
driver and a seamstress, she would be like, I don't know, like being like unhelpful at T-Mobile or something. Which, by the way, there's no problem with at all. But it just, Meghan McCain does not conceive of herself that way. So her vision of herself and reality are shockingly out of step. And this was just, I was shocked that Joy didn't smack her. And I think it's incredible, if you think of all the other like class and racial dynamics of the situation, that Whoopi has to step in to calm everybody down. Awkward.
Border states. Many friends of mine, this is the number one and only issue. And if we sit here and act like there isn't a crisis.
Basically, Meghan McCain is defending people who are totally freaked out and have paranoid delusional views about what's going on the border, even though I believe now for like the third year running, there's net negative migration. Go ahead.
Border states. Many friends of mine, this is the number one and only issue. And if we sit here and act like there isn't a crisis, that it's crazy people living in border states that think that there's a crisis,
but like I just said, this guy who's coming in wants to help those countries. That's the way to solve the problem. Keep them there happy or whatever. Solvent, give them a house, give them food, help them, help their children.
Give a Nicaraguan
stop the crime rates.
Well, we've had a bunch of liberal guests who do not want to send in aid at all.
I listen to you. Let me just finish.
Yeah, but part of your job is to listen to me.
Okay, so here's the deal. Here's what's not going to happen today. We're not going to do this. Everybody gets a conversation piece. Everybody gets to say their piece. And we don't need to comment if we don't like what we're hearing. Just let folks talk.
Jesus Christ. I had no idea that Michael Ian Black was so worried about immigration. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I mean, border states aren't all like there's Democrats notoriously doing better in, say, Texas or New Mexico, like in certain parts of Arizona. I don't think Meghan McCain quite has the pulse of border states as well as she
There
thinks
are
she
people in border states who cross the border every day to go to school or work.
My father didn't do that. He didn't cross borders.
Was he actually from even Arizona?
No, I don't remember where he's from.
But how would you feel if I busted that one out next time you interrupt me, Michael? It's your job to listen to me.
That actually would be pretty funny.
Actually, I wonder if I can isolate that as a drop.
I think that drop could be used to make fun of every single person in this staff except for Brendan. Could certainly work for any of the rest of us, even you at times, Matt, which is shocking. But of course,
to listen to me.
That's mostly Sam.
Yeah, but part of your job is to listen to me.
That's mostly Sam. That's Sam. Your job is to listen to me, and it's actually true. But what's so interesting, like the only thing about this, besides her just being a terrible person, is that all of her defense, Joy is actually just articulating a super moderate obvious position, which is like you will have less migration period if you have better conditions in other places, which is just like a truism. But like, you notice how like all of her Meghan McCain's like upset is always about like the emotional expression of a small group of elite people that she knows. Like, well, I know people in border states who feel this way.
They're really scared.
They're really scared. And this is really scary. I mean, sometimes it's literally just her own emotions when like she's freaking out about, you know, part of her trust fund getting taxed or something. But like, when somebody pointed out they were talking about the racism in the Republican Party, and she's like, "Oh, you really think we're all racist?" Like it's all like she is the elite version of that aggrievement politics that Sam's always talking about, like in a nutshell, and perfectly positioned too, because instead of waking up and being like, wow, like I have totally middling talent and capacity and I sit on The View every day and make millions of dollars and I sit next to people who had to work their asses off and I just got grandfathered into Columbia fathered into Columbia and fathered into show business, and like maybe I think that is the difference. Maybe it's just because Abby Huntsman is a Mormon and they're more kind of friendly, but there does seem to be like, and I've seen Abby Huntsman call for like cutting Social Security. Like she's terrible, but there does seem to be like this tiny glimmer of recognition that like, you know, I've had a pretty nice deal. So let me be like slightly less unpleasant.
Yeah, she probably thanks God every morning, whereas Meghan McCain, I don't know, asks Santa Claus for more things.
Meghan McCain's just like, why didn't Michael Ian Black text me back? What the hell?
Facts don't care about your feelings.
Oh my God. Majority Report is supported in part by Simple Habit. Simple Habit is the mobile app that provides a massive, diverse library of 5-minute guided meditations. And the Majority Report audience can try Simple Habit totally free for an entire week when you go to simplehabit.com/majority. There's a growing body of scientific evidence on the benefits of meditation. Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin is using MRI imaging to show how meditation can do everything from decrease stress to potentially even increase empathy and compassion. There is a lot of research on this. Simple Habit has over 2,000 guided meditations specifically designed for different parts of your day and just about anything you might be dealing with in life. They have guided meditations. I wonder if they have any for joy. They have guided meditations for mindfulness, meditations for anxiety, for depression, for when you're having trouble falling asleep, meditations for when you're wanting to overcome procrastination, or for when you have something important going on at work, meditation designed for parents. They have meditations made specifically for when you're waking up or on your lunch break or when you've gotten home from work or when you're going to bed. I've primarily used the sleep meditation to help me knock out at night, and that's been incredibly effective and cut down on my laying and looking at the ceiling time, which anybody goes through that, super unpleasant. Different people are trying to accomplish different things with meditation, and Simple Habit is able to cater to just about anyone, regardless of what their goals are with meditation or how much past experience they have with meditation. The variety of meditations on Simple Habit is what sets it apart. Simple Habit just won the 2008 Google Play Award for Best Wellbeing App. It's available on iOS, Android, and web browser. And the Majority Report audience can try it for free for a week by going to simplehabit.com/majority. If you're watching on YouTube, we've put a link to it in the video description. This is about 55 minutes, folks. Glenn Greenwald and Sam Seder on Russiagate. Russia.
We are back, Sam Seder on the Majority Report. On the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome back to this program Glenn Greenwald. He is, of course, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, co-founder of The Intercept. Glenn, welcome to the program.
Hey, it's great to be back on your program show, Sam. Thanks for having me.
So, all right. So, obviously, the big story in the news last, I guess, week or 2 weeks ago was the bringing of the Mueller report, I guess, to the DOJ, the submission of the Mueller report to the DOJ, essentially the end of the Mueller investigation, at least under Mueller himself. Some of the prosecutors, my understanding is, have gone off to other jurisdiction and could very well be working on some related investigations. But the Mueller investigation, as it was constructed, is over at this point. And we have seen, as of today, Friday, when we are recording this, only the 4-page summary from Barr on the Mueller report. So, all right, I got not a lot of criticism, but some pointed criticism for having any coverage whatsoever of the investigation as it was going on. We, I think we do a daily show. We had maybe 3 or 4 interviews that even were tangentially related to the Mueller investigation, or maybe more that were tangentially, but in terms of like the main thrust of the Mueller investigation, maybe 3 or 4 over the course of 2 years. And to me, that seemed like it was a legitimate amount of coverage to provide for this. I think you obviously have a critique of the excesses. I think we share in that critique. But so let me give you an opportunity to explain, like, why is this such a big deal? I mean, the amount of coverage, because I think we agree that there were certainly elements of the media that got obsessive about this. There were certainly some politicians who were ringing alarm bells. I don't know that we know all that they know or not. There's no way to know, but certainly politicians will leverage what they can. But why is it so important as it seems to be in terms of what you've expressed?
Well, so let me address, first of all, the issue of the coverage of your show and the media more broadly. I don't actually have a problem with the media covering the Mueller investigation or any credible allegations of criminality or corruption on the part of the president. I think that's what the media ought to be doing, in fact. My criticism has typically been of media outlets that aired only one side of the story and refused to bring on not just people who believe the Mueller investigation would lead to the uncovering of serious criminality or who believe the Trump-Russia conspiracy, but then kept people who questioned or were skeptical of that theory off their airwaves so that there was really almost never any debate, which I think is just generally unhealthy. And I don't think that was true of your show. As I understand it, you talked to Matt Taibbi, a few other people who have raised questions over the years about this. So my problem, to the extent that I have a problem with the media coverage, isn't that they covered the story. I think they had to cover the story. The problem was the way in which they covered it, which was often unhinged and irrational, excluding of dissent, which, like I said, I think just generally produces an unhealthy media environment. As far as why the story itself was always so important, in my view, is because if you look at what the core allegations were, going back to the 2016 campaign, and then especially once the Steele dossier shaped the public understanding of what the allegations were, they were inherently grave and serious, not just in terms of our domestic policies, but also geopolitically, because of the possibility that they had to seriously influence, for the worse, relations between 2 nuclear armed powers. That was always those are my 2 principal concerns: is what is it doing to our domestic politics, and then what is it doing to U.S.-Russian relations. So if you look at the 2 dominant allegations, the first of which was that the Russians interfered in the 2016 election with the help or participation or collaboration of the Trump campaign. And then secondly, the more serious allegation, which is that once Trump won, he was in some way beholden to the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin, such that Trump was essentially like a blackmail victim, that a foreign country could force him to make decisions that were beneficial to that foreign country and adverse to our own. Those are really serious allegations, right? Like, if either of those were true, those deserve major, major political coverage. I just, from the beginning, believe that neither of them had any basis in evidence. And I think the key event was not the issuance of the 4-page Barr letter that people have since fixated on. For me, the key moment was the day before when Mueller closed his investigation without indicting a single American for conspiracy between Trump and Russia over the election, without indicting Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner, even though they testified for hours and hours and hours and hours about the Trump Tower meeting, about everything else. On the issue of whether there are other prosecutions, there obviously are other cases, but the whole reason there was a special counsel appointed in the first place was because a decision was made by Rod Rosenstein after Jeff Sessions recused himself that the Justice Department, because it reports to Trump, can't investigate or prosecute Trump officials or Trump family members or people related to the Trump campaign for Trump-Russia conspiracy with regards to the election. So there's, a Southern District investigation into the Stormy Daniels payments, into various forms of Trump's financial dealings. But in terms of the core allegations that have dominated the media for the last 3 years, which is the question of collusion and the question of blackmail, those investigations are done. No, the Justice Department can't investigate those. Once Mueller closed his investigation without any indictments on those core questions, those investigations terminated. But that's why I think it deserved media coverage.
Right. And was it your understanding before the investigation happened that there was, and look, I have said ad nauseum on this program that it would be very difficult to quantify to what extent the Russian leak or I should say hack, and then leak of the emails influenced the election, and that there are, I think, maybe a dozen other reasons why Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump. But was it your understanding before the investigation started that it was established that Russia had interfered in the election? I mean, regardless of
I know, I don't think it was established. I think that there were enough allegations being raised that an investigation was warranted. My concern from mid 2016 when these allegations first arose, that there was something going on between Trump and Russia, which were first raised publicly by the Clinton campaign when it produced a video saying, what does Russia have on Trump? What's going on between Trump and Russia? Until mid 2017, when Mueller indicted GRU officials, or it might have been later in 2017, was that we were getting a lot of assertions from the U.S. government, from the Department of, from the Director of National Intelligence, from the CIA, that the Russian government was behind the hacking, that Putin himself ordered the hacks. And my position always was that it's certainly very plausible that Russia could have done it, right? Because Russia and the U.S., this is exactly the sort of thing they do to other countries and to one another for decades. Like, it'd be insane to come out and say, oh my God, Russia didn't do this. This is above Vladimir Putin. This, of course, is not above Vladimir Putin or any great power to spy on and interfere in. So my issue simply was I want to see evidence for it before I believe it, right? I think that's just our journalistic obligation. But I certainly never denied it or even suggested it was implausible. And in fact, one of the frustrations I had going back to January and February of 2017 was that the only things we were learning about all of this were very selected leaks coming from agencies that have a long history of misleading the public, who were protected by anonymity and therefore shielded from accountability. And what was so frustrating was we were getting these piecemeal leaks and all these claims, but no evidence to back it up. And that's why my position had always been, even before Robert Mueller was appointed, was we need some kind of comprehensive, independent investigation that will dig into all of this once and for all, and then at the end of the investigation inform the American public about what really didn't happen. And so I've always been an advocate of that investigation and still am to this day. I want to see the Mueller report released as fully as possible.
So, I mean, and we should say that I think the only leak that ended up getting punished from that had any accountability was Reality Winner, right? I mean, in terms of what we knew about Russian interference into the election.
Yeah, this is something that's actually kind of amazing because obviously I've worked with sources and whistleblowers who have been accused violating the law, including the Espionage Act, particularly Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. And under the law, the most serious kind of leak where it specifically says that not only the government official who does the leak, but also the newspapers that publish it can actually be found guilty under the Espionage Act. There's only a very small number of categories where you can actually be punished as a journalist for publishing leaks of information. One of those categories is if you leak intercepted communications between a foreign government and someone with whom they're communicating. Like the NSA eavesdrops on a call. If you as a newspaper publish those intercepts, under the law, you as a journalist can be punished for that. And yet somebody leaked the communications that Michael Flynn had with the Russian ambassador to the Washington Post, which is a leak I was in favor of because it proved Michael Flynn was lying. But that's like the most serious leak that you can possibly do. And yet there's been no one punished for that leak. Whereas Reality Winner, the leak that she did was something really benign. I mean, she leaked a document that, although it was marked top secret, was clearly something that belonged in the public domain and really didn't jeopardize anyone or anything because she gave it to a news organization, The Intercept, and we redacted information in conjunction with the NSA that they told us would jeopardize people's safety or sources and methods or whatever. So she was incredibly responsible in contrast to, say, David Petraeus, who leaked much more sensitive information, not to inform the public like Reality Winner did, but to get a more positive book from his mistress and didn't go to jail at all. So there's clearly an imbalance there, but you're right. She's the only leaker to have been punished.
Okay. And so I mean, if there was so much extant that we did not know during this time, what is, when we hear stuff like people saying, and I don't know if you've said it specifically, but that this was a hoax, that this was a scam, is basically what you're talking about a media critique? Because I want to get on to the domestic and foreign implications, but I mean, I'm trying to get at what was so problematic, because it seems like is that a fair assessment? Is that when when we hear things like hoax or scam, it's really just a function of a relatively small group of people in the media, certainly, obviously not Fox, was not scamming on this particular topic.
Well, Fox scammed. I mean, Fox promoted a disgusting conspiracy theory about Seth Rich. But no. So obviously I do have a critique of the media, CNN and MSNBC in particular, but it extends beyond that. So I think the Democratic Party, politicians like Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell and Chuck Schumer, as well as particularly ex-members of the intelligence community, John Brennan and James Clapper and Michael Hayden, who despise Donald Trump, very much were at the forefront of creating this conspiracy theory, which I don't mean in a derogatory sense. I'm just describing neutrally what this is. It's an allegation of a conspiracy that took place that never had any evidence.
That conspiracy theory, if we're going to define it that way, that was Rod Rosenstein, right? I mean, he tasked Mueller with that, test this conspiracy theory, that there was a conspiracy,
absolutely.
Right?
He did the right thing. He said, investigate this, right? Which is much different than going on TV and asserting that it's true.
So my point is that these people did not develop the theory. I mean, look, they may have, I guess, but I mean, as far as I can tell, the edification of the theory of conspiracy was literally the message from Rosenstein to the Mueller investigation. This is the theory.
Sam, that happened in the spring of 2017. And there was at least 8 or 9 months preceding that in which the allegations were constantly being voiced about this conspiracy. The reason that there was an investigation was because people were alleging that this happened.
Well, that's why it became a criminal investigation. The reason why the investigation launched in the first part was because there was evidence from a foreign envoy who had talked to Papadopoulos, I guess, and that began an intelligence investigation, and coupled with the fact that Trump had brought on an advisor who was already under, suspicion of being some type of Russian asset, Carter Page.
Carter Page, right?
You had an intel investigation at that point, right?
So, it's unclear to this very day what actually started the investigation. There's been news reports that it was the Carter Page suspicions that initiated the investigation. There are reports that, in fact, it was George Papadopoulos. And then there are separate reports that, at least within some sectors of the FBI, what really convinced them was the reporting of the Steele dossier. But let me just, on the question of whether this is a hoax or a scam or anything like that, explain to you what I mean by that. I do not mean by that the existence of an investigation itself was a hoax or a scam, because, as I said, I favored an investigation from the beginning because I really wanted to get to the point that we're now at, where an investigator who pretty much everybody believes or agrees is at least credible, not perfect, but credible, Robert Mueller, had unlimited resources, subpoena power, a massive team of FBI investigators and prosecutors that everyone said were the top-notch, top-level, top-flight investigators, and they spent 22 months digging into every nook and cranny of what happened. And so presumably the Mueller report is going to tell us more or less definitively what happened, which I'm really glad about, that we no longer have to rely on little bits and pieces of anonymous leaks. The reason why I say things are a scam is, let me just give you an anecdote that Michael Isikoff talked about on MSNBC the last time he was on. I don't think he's been on since. Michael Isikoff, to his great credit, because he was one of the earliest reporters who, along with David Corn, injected the Steele dossier into the public discourse, went on MSNBC and said, not only is it the case that the core allegations of the Steele dossier, he doesn't mean like the PP tape or the Prague meeting, he means like the overall narrative of the Steele dossier, that there was this elaborate, extended, multi-level conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Not only has that been proven to be false because of the lack of evidence for it, but we all had ways to know that it was false. And had we simply been using our rational capacities as opposed to our dug-in, kind of invested mentality, we would have on many occasions realized it was false. And the example he gave, which to me is one of the most convincing, although there are a lot of these, is when Robert Mueller indicted Roger Stone for lying to investigators. If you read that indictment, it's really amazing, because what it says is that what Roger Stone lied about to investigators was the nature of the communications he was having with the Trump campaign and the communications he was having with WikiLeaks. And Robert Mueller got the text and the emails between the Trump campaign on the one hand and Roger Stone on the other. And all the way into September or October of 2016, so like not just weeks, but days before WikiLeaks released the Podesta emails, the Trump campaign was saying to Roger Stone, hey, it seems like Julian Assange is saying he has some serious dirt on Hillary Clinton. Can you do anything to find out whether that's true and what he has? And as Michael Isikoff said, the minute Robert Mueller says that, that is the proof that like the Trump campaign was not a participant in this effort, because they had no idea what WikiLeaks had. If they were in bed with the Russians the whole time, they wouldn't have needed Roger Stone to try and desperately get to London and find out from Julian Assange whether or not he had any dirt. And the fact that none of us, or very few of us, stopped and said, wait a minute, this indictment shows that this narrative that we've been fed for the last 2 years is false. It negates and refutes the narrative. I think that's what I mean by hoax and scam, that there was no real effort to find the truth. There was this interest in hoping that the Mueller investigation would lead to Trump Jr. and Kushner and Trump being frog marched out of the White House in handcuffs. And that episode kind of encapsulates for me how I think we failed in our discourse.
Now, we should be clear that that Stone was not part of the campaign. So he sort of falls outside of the scope of what at least Barr has said, was being looked at in the context of this, conspiracy. and Stone maximizing with WikiLeaks when the best time to release these things would also not be criminal, unless there was some greater, I guess, the way that WikiLeaks got the emails. I mean, we don't know, but I guess to the extent that there would be any type of chain, it's broken between Stone and the campaign, as he's not a member of the campaign, and theoretically WikiLeaks and Russia. So I just want to make that clear to people. So now
but just quickly on that, Sam, if I could just insert one important fact, which is, if like WikiLeaks has always said, both publicly and then even privately in private chats that got released, Roger Stone is an asshole and a liar. Roger Stone keeps claiming, because this is what Roger Stone has done in his whole career, right? Is he like makes himself more important than he really is. So he's going around claiming that he had special knowledge of what WikiLeaks had. The Mueller indictment shows pretty much that Roger Stone was almost entirely in the dark, that he was trying to find out what WikiLeaks had, but knew nothing. And in fact, when he tried to speculate, he got it wrong. He kept saying he thought that this was going to implicate Tony Podesta and that it was about the Clinton Foundation. And that's obviously not what it was about. So even Roger Stone was in the dark. He was trying to find out, like we all were.
We don't know everything that has happened in terms of with Stone, right? I mean, it's still conceivable that there's stuff to happen. So I don't know if that chapter is really is written yet, but up to this point, yes, that's correct. Now, I notice, like, when you talk about the Mueller investigation, you're not saying there's no evidence, that he found no evidence anymore. Because all we know from the Barr assessment is that to the extent that he found any evidence, and maybe he didn't find any, but he could have also found some, right? But just not enough for an indictment. You agree with that?
So we're not going to know until the Mueller report is released what exactly Robert Mueller said, right? But I do think it's important to note the following. In general, prosecutors have a very narrow mandate, right? They're supposed to answer one very technical, narrow, cramped question, which is not, is somebody guilty of wrongdoing or not, but is there enough evidence to justify an indictment with some degree of certainty that you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt in a courtroom that they're guilty of that crime. And oftentimes prosecutors decline to indict somebody even though they believe they're guilty, because it doesn't rise to that really high level that we've set as a society for criminally convicting somebody, right? Beyond reasonable doubt. And in general, that's all prosecutors are supposed to do. They're supposed to just say, I'm indicting or I'm not. And when they don't indict, they're not supposed to accuse anybody of wrongdoing because it's really unfair, right? Like, imagine if a prosecutor says, I investigated Sam Seder for pedophilia. I decided not to indict him, which means you have no chance to defend yourself. But there was a lot of evidence that Sam Seder is actually a pedophile. It just didn't rise to that would be the most unfair thing to you possible, because then you're accused, but you have no chance to defend yourself. That's why people were so upset with what Jim Comey did to Hillary Clinton, right? He held a press conference and he said, I'm not going to indict her, but she did all kinds of terrible things. And it was like...
The problem with what Comey did was that you're not supposed to do that within a certain distance of an election. I mean, that is one of the sort of the key principles of public corruption cases. But yes, there were other issues with that. But yes,
he was unfair to Hillary Clinton because he accused Hillary Clinton of wrongdoing, even though he didn't indict her, which is something prosecutors never do. And Comey's defense is like, look, in this case, it was such an exceptional case that had I simply said I'm not indicting Hillary Clinton with no explanation, 50% of the country would have concluded that the Justice Department was corrupted for partisan reasons. So that's usually what prosecutors do. Mueller, as I understand it, and as the Rod Rosenstein letter says, and as the special counsel statute describes, has a much broader mandate than that. He's not simply acting as a prosecutor deciding whether or not the evidence rises to the level where indictments are warranted. We already know he indicted nobody for conspiring with the Russians over the election. We already know that he didn't indict Trump Jr. with the Russian government, right? We already know that he didn't indict Well, he didn't indict any Americans for conspiring with Russians over the election.
Well, but that wasn't his mandate, right? I mean, the what we know from the Barr letter is that very specific, like you say, there was a very, very narrow mandate, at least as that no members of the Trump campaign, right, conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. So theoretically, they could have conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in other activities, and non-members of the Trump campaign could have done that, and Russian, I don't know, friends of Russian government theoretically could do that. In terms of like what that line says, we don't know anymore without seeing the Mueller report. Is my point.
Okay, that's fair enough. Although I think in order to know the mandate of the Mueller investigation, the key document to look at is not the Barr letter, but the Rod Rosenstein letter appointing Robert Mueller and describing what his investigation was supposed to examine. And there it was pretty broad. It was not just did the Trump campaign conspire? It was also links between the Trump campaign on the one hand and the Russian government on the other.
Individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts. I mean, and we don't know yet, though, right? I mean, that's the thing. We don't know how. We just know what Barr has presented to us.
But we do know. But we do know some things. So, like I said, we know that the Trump campaign as late as September, October of 2016 didn't know what WikiLeaks had, which is why they were trying to get Roger Stone to find out. We know that Mueller closed his investigation without indicting any Trump campaign officials or members of the Trump family for doing any of what you just read, having links to the Russian government or conspiring or collaborating with them over the election, right? There are no indictments. And the point that I was making just now is that Mueller's mandate is not this narrowed standard prosecutorial mandate of tell us whether there's enough evidence to justify an indictment. The Mueller mandate as a special counsel is write a report telling us what actually happened. So this segment of the Barr report that he quoted, which, I don't think anybody thinks that Barr just fabricated a quote. Even these anonymous objectors who are saying that Barr's letter left incriminating stuff out have made clear that they're talking about the obstruction section of the Barr letter and not the collusion or conspiracy section. But we need to know what that sentence is. But when Mueller says the evidence doesn't establish that there was collaboration or conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia, I don't think he's simply saying I didn't find enough evidence to rise to that really high level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I think he's saying, I'm speaking as somebody here to tell you what my investigation found happened. We already know he didn't indict. He's saying, this report is designed to tell you what happened, and the evidence doesn't establish that this happened. Now, we should wait for the Mueller report to say for sure, but that to me is my understanding of what Robert Mueller was doing in that report.
Okay, so you're saying that there's the standard of where I'm going to bring an indictment, then there's the standard of what I believe, and then below that may be some evidence, but this is the level of establish. Here's indictment, here's establish, here's anything down to completely exonerated, I guess.
Precise. I mean, nobody would say no evidence, right? Like the Trump Tower meeting is evidence, right? So then the question is it like compelling evidence? Is it convincing? So yeah, I agree with you. I
feel like there were people who were getting out in front of their skis on this stuff, and you may be right about what establish means in that instance. We're not going to know until we see the report, and I hope we do end up seeing that. All right, so let me ask you this about the stakes. This is the thing that I also don't understand. And I agree with the critique. I feel that people went overboard with this. I'm not surprised certain politicians leveraged it. And, to the extent that we didn't necessarily spend a lot of time critiquing it, but basically what we just did other stuff that we thought was more important. I mean, implicit in my editorial decisions every day is a function of what we think people should be paying attention to. But what are the stakes from your perspective? Because, one of the things, you cited Matt Taibbi's piece about it being like weapons of mass destruction. And I get I think it's a bad analogy. And I get the idea that this was that people perceive it as a big hoax, or that they were carrying water, that it was a conspiracy theory. But it seems to me the import of a hoax and whatnot is the stakes that's involved here. And because I don't see really, I mean, there's marginal implications to this investigation, to Adam Schiff, hyping it, and to maybe Rachel Maddow dedicating too much of her show to it. But I don't really see what the massive stakes are that seem to be there.
Okay, so I'll give you my view of that. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has this doomsday clock that is measuring how close humanity is to apocalyptic catastrophe, basically the destruction of the planet, and has had this clock since the end of World War II. And that clock is currently at 2 minutes before midnight, midnight being the destruction of the Earth and humanity as a species, which is the most acute rating it's given to humanity since 1953, when the US and the Soviet Union came very, very close to nuclear annihilation. And in its report explaining why it's at 2 minutes before midnight, it lists two principal reasons, one of which is apocalyptic climate scenarios, the other of which is the threat of nuclear war between the United States and Russia. So the US and Russia, even though the Soviet Union fell and the Cold War sort of is over, although I think it's been revitalized over the last 3 years, continue to have thousands of intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear tips pointed at one another's cities. And so when you create this kind of narrative that Russia is our enemy, something that President Obama, to his great credit, and I credited him contemporaneously, was desperate to avoid. He was desperate to avoid provoking the Kremlin, putting the U.S. in a position where it was geopolitically adverse to the Kremlin. When you create this narrative that the Russians are our enemy, that speaking to Russia is evidence of some sort of sinister motives, I think it's an extremely dangerous and reckless thing to do. And then the other part of it is, I think that there has been this revitalization on the part of a huge number of people who are paying attention to politics for the first time because of fear of Trump, of putting faith in these institutions that the left had finally successfully convinced people in the wake of the Iraq War to start distrusting, like the CIA, like the FBI, like the NSA, like the military. I think there's been this very kind of jingoistic, pro-military, pro-security state ethos, neocons being integrated into MSNBC, into the liberal kind of fabric, that I also think is independently damaging from a domestic political perspective.
Okay, first off, in terms of like the atomic clock thing, from 2018, the first three paragraphs of the "it's now 2 minutes to midnight" assessment talk about North Korea. That's from 2018. In 2017, it mentions the United States and Russia, but then climate change comes in, and they also include in that first paragraph Pakistan and India. And in 2016, I think it's, there is, in 2016, it is the same, and 2015, it's the same in terms of like, there's no change. 2016 was more climate change, of course. But the amount of change that we're talking about in that 30 seconds is a function of North Korea. And so, which of course has nothing to do with this. And I agree with so that to me seems, I think, a dubious impact from this. I'm looking at polling from where the American public looks at Russia. And there's no doubt that there's been, it's more in the popular culture. Maybe Saturday Night Live is talking about it. But the polling shows no difference between 2015 and 2017 or 2019 between your overall opinion of Russia. 70% were unfavorable in February of 2015, and 73% in February of 2019. And that's within the margin of error, that change. Same with in terms of whether they're a danger. Like the atomic clock thing, I think it's a non-starter. Maybe there could be some element.
Let me just address a couple of things.
Let me address the other one.
Go Go ahead.
The other one about the institutions. MSNBC was tacking to the right before Donald Trump won in anticipation of Hillary Clinton winning. This is public knowledge. They've almost every contributor that they've hired over the past couple of years has either been at this point a prosecutor, former prosecutor, and I agree,
Right.
and or a Republican. And I think it's a shame. Believe me, I think it's a shame. But MSNBC is not an important pillar of our society. So I think they're legitimate critiques, but I think they're overblown, frankly. I mean, I just don't see the fallout from this. And it's not like Russia didn't do what, and you and I agree, I think that it was probably not as significant as people make it out to be, but that part of it is not even a function of whether Donald Trump colluded with it or not.
Right. So, right. So, I mean, right. So, I do think that the kind of disproportionate treatment of this kind of like Russia interfered in our sacred democracy rhetoric is misleading and dangerous, because not only have these two countries done it to other countries far worse forever, but even to one another, right? Like the U.S. boasted of helping Boris Yeltsin.
Even better, let's say that that's very problematic, and let's us not do it.
Right.
I'm willing to leverage that as that's a bad thing to do. So therefore, we should not be involved in any way in what's going on in Venezuela.
Right. I'm right. Well, but let's look at this, because this issue about the state of U.S.-Russian relations, and I've reported a lot on the Bulletin of Atomic Science report. I don't have it in front of me. I think that we have some differences about the extent to which they're emphasizing the dangers of nuclear war between those two countries. Obviously, in 2018, when Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump were threatening to annihilate one another on Twitter, that became something that got the attention of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. But throughout that report, there's a constant reference to the U.S. and Russia, because under the Trump administration, contrary to the prevailing wisdom, there has been a far greater proliferation of belligerence and confrontation with Russia in really dangerous ways. So you look, for example, I think one of the most disturbing examples is the question of sending lethal arms to Ukraine, probably the most important country geopolitically to Russia. In 2015, 2016, you can Google this, Democrats and Republicans were demanding that Obama send lethal arms to Ukrainians to fight against the Russians. And he said, are you out of your mind? Why would we risk provocation with Russia over a country that's of immediate interest to them, but not to us? So Obama refused. The Trump administration sent lethal arms to the Ukrainians. The Trump administration is currently in the process of trying to destabilize and remove from power a really important leader of a very important geopolitical country, or an oil-rich country that is a longtime ally of the Kremlin, which is the Maduro regime, while the Russian military is on the ground trying to defend the Maduro government from being removed. On top of which, you have Donald Trump going to Germany and badgering Angela Merkel successfully, to some extent now, to stop buying natural gas from Russia and instead buy it from U.S. companies on the not unreasonable ground that the U.S. spends huge amounts of money through NATO to defend Germany. So why should Germany be buying natural gas from Russia instead of buying it from the U.S.? An incredibly threatening thing to do to the Kremlin, because if Europe stopped buying natural gas from Russia, it would probably tank the entire Russian economy. So you see the U.S. and Russia, there's a huge naval buildup in the Black Sea. The Americans confronted Russia for the first time in the Japan Sea since 1987. There's a possible military base being constructed in Poland. In all these hotspots around the world, you see Russian-U.S. tensions increasing. At the same time, the climate in Washington is such that you can't even talk to Russians, which is why a lot of these Trump officials lied about their connections with Russia, because every time you talk to a Russian official, it gets depicted as some kind of treasonous conspiracy or collusion. And that's what I think is so dangerous, is you have this increasing belligerence and escalation between the U.S. and the Russians on the one hand, and hotspots around the world, Syria being another that I didn't even mention. Trump bombed, Assad, in a very limited way, but Obama refused to because he was scared of the escalation problems that would bring. And at the same time, an inability to talk to the Russians, which miscommunication, miscalculation in the past is what led to inadvertent nuclear exchanges. So I do think minimizing the danger of that is ill-advised. And then just quickly on how we see...
But wait, let me just address those, because every single one of those policies that you've talked about were long-standing Republican policies. I mean, every single one. And whether it was Chavez or Maduro, buying gas from the U.S. is a function of all you need to do is look at some of Donald Trump's biggest supporters, the same ones who put every head of EPA in there. They all want this. They wanted this from day one. They basically built a there's a reason why he built his first version, Trump Cabinet V1 was basically just full of oil executives and generals. And so the idea of, all of these things are completely consistent with long-term Republican agendas. And to the point where when Manafort probably, I don't know if we know, was so insistent on changing the Republican platform, that's why all the lights went on, started flashing, because... And it was specifically about that provision about not selling lethal weapons to Crimea. That's why it was such a big deal, that it was such a divergence from standard issue Republican policy that it
I know, but Sam, Donald Trump himself is a huge divergence from standard Republican ideology. He ran against the Iraq War, even though...
Well, I know what he did in the election, what has he done that has been divergent from Republican orthodoxy since he's been in office? Calling for cuts in Medicare. He just had massive tax cuts.
Domestically, he's a full. I agree. This is one of the things that I think is true about the Trump presidency, and I actually said this last week, is that you have kind of his freakish circus tweeting that obviously is wildly out of the range of normalcy for how presidents speak and conduct themselves, and the stuff he says is campaign rallies. And then you have over here kind of the actual governance. And the governance itself is, I think, well within the range of standard Republican orthodoxy. I agree with that entirely. I was just simply saying that Republican orthodoxy, and by the way, Democratic orthodoxy, remember Obama's refusal to act against Russia and Ukraine, to bomb Assad, was wildly criticized by the whole bipartisan foreign policy class in Washington. They thought Obama was appeasing Putin constantly. So I agree. I think I agree totally with you that the Trump administration has been belligerent toward Russia in a way that Republican orthodoxy has long called for, which is why I have been so contemptuous of the idea that Donald Trump is this Russian asset sitting in the White House forcing the United States to act in Russian interest, when in fact American policy over and over and over and over again has been directly contrary to and threatening to vital Russian interests, not ancillary Russian interests, but vital Russian interests.
I think there's an argument that the sanctions relief, which he certainly pursued, which is basically just putting money in people's pockets at the end of the day, that is a pretty big incentive. For him following all the Republican orthodoxy and the this national security establishment orthodoxy, you do have things like, we're going to burn the translator records, or we're not going to take any records of this meeting between these two heads of these two states. That's the only unorthodox thing he's doing. And that's a very, I can understand why people would be like, wow, that's a very strange thing to do. And what's behind that? That's fairly intriguing, right? We're going to have no record of it.
You can look at it, right? You can look at it that way, or you can look. What the Trump people say is, every time Trump talks to the Russians, it ends up leaking, because people in the CIA or people in the FBI who wanted to pick Trump as a Russian stooge, which is going on since the campaign, end up leaking what he says to Putin. And you can't have frank relations between leaders if both of them think that what they end up saying to one another is going to end up being leaked. And so taking precautions to make sure that those conversations aren't leaked doesn't seem like an entirely sinister thing, to me at least, to do. I mean, that seems like a fairly rational thing. But let me just address the second part about public perceptions of both Russia and the FBI. I think that if you look at overall polling, you're right that if you compare 2015 polling about how Russia is perceived or the FBI is perceived to 2019 polling about how Russia or the FBI is perceived, or for that matter, WikiLeaks, it kind of stays the same. So the number of Americans who view Russia favorably in 2015 is the same as the number of Americans who view them the same in 2019, view them favorably in 2019. But what has changed radically is the partisan breakdown. So in 2014, Republicans adored and revered the CIA and the FBI, and the Democrats were skeptical. That has now almost completely reversed. There's a huge upsurge in trust and faith that Democrats place in those institutions, and a complete collapse in the trust and faith that Republicans have been put in them, because Republicans have been fed the narrative that this is a corrupt deep state trying to overthrow the democratically elected government, whereas Democrats have been fed the opposite narrative that these are the agencies that are going to save us from the criminality of Trump. Same with Russia. 2013, 2014, Marco Rubio, John McCain, all of those guys were saying Putin is this evil regime, Obama is appeasing them. So the Republicans were being told that Russia is this grave threat that Obama was insufficiently standing up to. That is completely reversed. 2012 said it's the number one geopolitical threat. Obama mocked him for it, said the Cold War wants the 1980s wants its foreign policy back. So all of it's kind of been fundamentally reversed, right? In the way that often happens when the parties change the White House. So you're right that overall the perception is the same, but I don't think there's any question. I think the polling data you're referring to demonstrates, I know it does on the question of the FBI, I'm almost certain it does on the question of Russia, that Democrats see Russia as a greater threat than they did 3 or 4 years ago, which would make sense. That Democrats trust the FBI and CIA more than they did 3 or 4 years ago. And that's what I'm really worried about, is that, you know, for a long time in this country, we did have a Democratic Party that were the Cold Warriors, right? Harry Truman is the one who dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan. It was John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson who prosecuted the Vietnam War, the sort of Iraq War of that generation. And I'm really worried that the Democratic Party is embracing, and it's why the neocons are now migrating back to the Democratic Party, this kind of militaristic, imperialistic, jingoistic ethos that I think is really harmful and that I've always been opposed to from the time that I began writing about politics. That's the worry that I have. Not that overall the body politic is embracing these narratives that Russia is a threat and the FBI and CIA are good and trustworthy, but that Democrats in particular are, because not just MSNBC, and I mean, Rachel Maddow is really influential, but it's not just her at all. It's CNN also has a huge number of former prosecutors, former military officials that they also hired to help shape the news. Those are the sources that the New York Times and the Washington Post quote. I just think that there's been too much of a rehabilitation of neocons and the truth of these agencies, and that's what I worry about.
I couldn't agree with you more about that. And I think, you know, I think that's true. And I think to a certain extent, some of that is inevitable. I mean, as a joke that, and fortunately, I don't think it's been him as much, although to some extent. But one of the biggest problems we were talking about in the summer of 2016 was if Donald Trump wins, then we all have to pretend like Jonathan Chait knows what he's talking about again. And I listen, I agree. This is all, but to a certain extent, this is all sort of predictable and cyclical in a function of who's in office and who's not out. I mean, that's why, like, it seems to me all of the critiques you're making were just as valid regardless of what the Mueller investigation found. I mean, it wasn't hinged on, in my mind, as to what we find in that report. All of those things are true regardless, as far as I'm concerned. But I don't know that we've left anything on the table. Do you?
No, I mean, I guess the only thing that I would add is that, I do think that. Did you have something that you?
I did.
Yeah, go ahead.
I had one thing that I wanted to buy, but you go ahead first.
Do you think I needed to apologize to have Marcy Wheeler on the program?
No. I do not. I don't. That is not. I do not. Look, Michael. You know what? Let me just say this about those of us who have been expressing skepticism about the overriding narrative that the non-Fox media has more or less unanimously embraced. And there were people inside of these news outlets, I heard from them all the time, who also had a lot of skepticism about what was being reported and what was being said, and kind of felt like they weren't able to express them because they saw what happened to those of us who were doing that. We were banished from a lot of media platforms that previously we had regular access to. I think the last time Matt Taibbi was on MSNBC was like December of 2016 or January of 2017. I don't think Jeremy Scahill has been on in 3 years. I haven't been on since December 2016 when I talked to R.A. Melber about the need for skepticism. But, and on top of that, I think that a lot of us who are expressing this skepticism were vilified not just for being wrong, which is fair enough. That's what happens in political debates, but for being Trump apologists or even Trump supporters or even paid agents of the Kremlin. I don't mean by random trolls on Twitter. I mean by like really prominent people. So I can understand why after 3 years, nerves are kind of raw. Matt Taibbi and Michael Tracy talked about the psychological toll this has taken on them, which, you can kind of dismiss and mock. But at the same time, it is real when you're trying to kind of push some dissent into, you feel like you're standing in front of a freight train. And when you feel like at least some of what you've been doing has not been fully vindicated, but at least somewhat been affirmed, like at least the need for skepticism all along, I think there's a recognition that at least Rachel Maddow and people like that went too far. I understand why people are being a little overly zealous. And I also think the issue about what Marcy did with turning in her own source to the FBI, not in the face of a subpoena, but proactively and voluntarily, and then got celebrated for it by the media, is something that we ought to revisit at some point. I don't want to talk about Marcy when she's not here, but I do. I don't. I think Marcy is an extremely intelligent, diligent reporter. She's one of the first people I tried to hire when we started The Intercept, who we did hire. If I had a show, I would put Marcy on. So no, I don't think putting Marcy on is something that you ought to apologize for. But I do think we should revisit that issue about that turning in of the source on the ground.
I have a feeling there'll be ample opportunity in the future. I don't know if we've maybe we'll see the investigation when we see the report. We'll have a sense of what the implications of that are, and I imagine that's a story. And that's certainly, from my perspective, when I came in on that Monday after the report had been dropped, I was like, I guess we're going to have to talk about this today and push our, I don't want to counter program with somebody who's talking about the implications of slavery and politics, antebellum Civil War. But having Marcy on, it seemed to me, would be more apt when we have a sense of what the full report says. But I appreciate that, and I do appreciate the that there has been an excess on the side of people who really wanted to believe that Donald Trump would be removed from office over this, and maybe other things. I don't think so, but I don't think it's going to be possible to get him out of that office in that way. But yes, I think that there's been excesses on both sides of this argument that I think have been inappropriate, frankly. But Glenn, I appreciate your coming on and talking about it, and I guess we now wait to see what's actually in the report.
Yes, exactly.
All right,
Sam. Great.
Thanks,
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it.
Talk.
All right. Bye-bye.
Glenn, can we all come together as one? I can't elaborate from like what the Office version of that joke, that bit is, but keen observers could fill in the blanks. All right, folks, we're going to go to the fun half. Become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. Sam is en route to Vegas. Thursday, I'll be in the main chair. I think we're going to do a news day, go over the Israeli elections, some things that are happening today. We'll go over them a bit as well in the fun half. I thought that was actually pretty solid. I don't necessarily know how much more there is to say about it.
I feel like that horse has been beaten a little bit.
I think so. I hate that phrase, but I think you're right.
I love that phrase because I'm from the Dakotas.
Because you're from the Dakotas.
It's literal for Matt.
It's like, beat that son of a bitch. I don't know why I give you that voice, but it's funny. Become a member of the Majority Report today. Majority.fm/become a member. Less than a cup of coffee a day. Leave us a rating on iTunes. Subscribe on YouTube. Spread the word. All of those things. And, of course, you can follow us on social media. On tonight's Michael Brooks show, Felix Biederman's in studio. We're going to do a real deep dive into the longer history of the Meghan McCain-Joy Behar drama. We're also talking about Dave Rubin, some new insight. I really think I'm on something here. QAnon and the Gambino family, a bunch more stuff. Soumya Shankar on India's elections and a kind of history around the BJP and Hindutva. Become a patron, patreon.com/TMBS. Get the whole Michael Brooks Show experience. And also, Matt, can we throw up on screen? We have, I don't know exactly how many tickets left to the LA live show at the Bootleg Theatre on April 20th with special guests Nando, Vila, Big Wosny, Lambre, and Ana Kasparian and the Young Turks. I know the Young Turks, I think, are going to start doing a promotion on it, and we're already well over halfway sold out. So these will go and have been going quick. So I would get your tickets now. You can get your VIP tickets or your regular admittance tickets, and we will see you in LA April 20th. Of course, Matt and David Griscom along with me. Jamie, what's up?
So this past weekend, the guys from Street Fight, Brett Payne and Murder Brian, were in town for the epic live show they did at Littlefield. So we took the opportunity to record with them because we are in many ways kindred spirits. They are the #1 anarcho comedy radio show in the country. So we had them on to talk about workers' inquiry, kratom, parenting, drugs, and small business tyrants. And I'm really excited. It's out now for patrons and tomorrow for everyone. So check it out.
Sweet. Matt?
Yeah, Literary Hangover, the Oscar Wilde episode is up on the podcast feed, and the King Philip's War episode is up on the YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube. I'll have the Oscar Wilde episode up hopefully today, unless I made a typo in the exporting of the video, which sometimes happens, and takes another 14 hours to pump one out, so we'll see.
And of course, I should say 7 p.m. tonight on Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel. We'll see you in the fun half.
You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled.
Oh, you left his best.
Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Bull Prague is super talented, as always. As are DJ Danarchy. As are, I don't know. There's too many. You know that now they're between like The Redirect, Ronald Reagan's really, really good podcast, Ghetto News Network, which is a really good podcast. Jeff from Georgia has a good podcast. Dissident Peasant has a good podcast. We've got like this whole ecosystem. Isha historically is a great podcast.
All the
It's very up my. Yeah, sure. I'm actually not familiar with that one. I'm sure it's a good one. I'm sure it exposes hypocrisy. All right, let's take a quick call out of the gate. You're calling from a 972 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Michael. This is Dor. Can you hear me all right?
Can you tell me your name again?
Dor.
D-O-R. Okay. What's on your? Where are you calling from, Dor?
Yeah. I'm calling from Israel.
How you doing? What's on your mind, man?
Just thought about calling in, getting your take about the elections. I've been somewhat peer pressured by my other leftist friends to, I'm sorry about the cat.
No worries.
To not vote for like an actual leftist party, but rather to like this new central party that its whole purpose seems to just be able to, depose Netanyahu, get him out of office. But in terms of like the peace process or anything, they don't really have anything. They don't really have much of a vision in place.
Right. You're talking about Benny Gantz, the Benny Gantz coalition, right?
Exactly, exactly. And I think one would be remiss to not mention that Benny Gantz was the Israeli chief of staff during the 2014 war on Gaza.
Absolutely.
There were like 30% civil casualties, not guerrillas or anything, just civilians.
No, that operations in 2014 were so vicious and so brutal targeting Gaza that Joe Scarborough did a segment saying like, what's going on here? Because they bombed a UN school. I mean, when you have Joe Scarborough talking about Palestinian humanity, do you realize how, the obscenity of the crimes that Israel engaged in 2014 would be hard, I think, for most people to comprehend. So, yeah, I mean, look, I can't, I feel really weird telling people in other places, I just could tell you how I would vote. I would vote for a left party because to me, and granted, I'm not, of course, things like, fiscal policies and austerity versus non-austerity policies matter. I don't necessarily know that the centrist coalition is necessarily even that much better on those things than Netanyahu. But to me, like, you know, you just can't think about or vote or analyze Israel outside of the occupation. You can't. I mean, that is the central defining characteristic of the place. So, you know, I would have to register. I mean, last election cycle, I certainly would have voted for the joint list. And, you know, those are the parties I support in Israel if I was voting in Israeli elections, for sure.
Right. Now, I also think, and tell me if I'm wrong, but there's some utilitarian value for keeping Netanyahu and replacing him with a new face that the world still hasn't learned to despise, so to speak.
I think there is a truth that Netanyahu is very easy to dislike, and he's, you know, a horrible brand ambassador for Israel, and he's distinctly unlikable. I think that that's true.
That's a good thing.
That's probably a good thing.
I mean, from an American context, he's put himself in the context of, you know, House Republicans, right?
Like, I mean, when you have Beto O'Rourke, which he did again at a campaign rally yesterday, saying Netanyahu's a racist, Netanyahu's doing some work for slightly clarifying. Although it also goes the other way, because he's such an obvious villain, and he's such an obvious creature of the far extreme right and a Republican, that it's easy to personalize a policy to him that, as you know, is a policy, right? Like, and there's a lot of structural factors behind where Israel has been, and then even more so like where it's going, right? So I think it goes both ways. I think in some ways, yes, Netanyahu obviously is horrible for the brand of Israel because he's just such an unlikable person. But on the other hand, there's going to be, I think that's actually going to be the new democratic move, right? It's increasingly untenable to defend Israel if you're running any type of modern center-left campaign. So what are you going to do? You're going to isolate it to one particularly unlikable person versus a policy that, frankly, I mean, as you know, literally goes back to 1967. I mean, you know, these are, and the expansion of settlements has actually, and sometimes the rate of increase has been faster under labor. And I think, you know, a guy like Ehud Olmert, who I actually really, you know, where I differ from some other people on the left, I would not put him in the same category as Netanyahu. I do think they represent different things, but I also know that, you know, he's responsible for incredible war crimes during his tenure as prime minister. So, you know, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I know how I would vote. I would vote for a joint list candidate, for sure.
Right. You wouldn't be going like being strategic about it, like, and because I think it's sort of parallel to like the dilemma the leftists have in America for 2020. Like, are we being pragmatic with our vote, or, you know, or are we voting what we want to, like, ideologically?
I wonder, I mean, you could be right. I just don't know if, to me, like in the United States, there's still enough, even in the worst possible choices, right? Like if Hillary Clinton's kept in the Iran agreement and you saved a couple of Supreme Court seats, that already is enough of a material difference on people's lives. Now, again, I'm speaking from the perspective that maybe if you were to tell me that there was a party in Israel that was terrible and, you know, totally pro-apartheid and so on, but was going to significantly reverse austerity and privatization, then I would say, look, that's a more complicated choice. I don't know what to tell you. But my understanding of voting left in Israel is that, in fact, like the joint list parties are also primarily socialist. So you're sort of registering what you want on domestic policy as well. I mean, when I see these centrist parties run, it seems to me that the primary agenda is just that Netanyahu's an asshole and will look better internationally without him. No difference on domestic policy and no difference on foreign policy. So, you know, that's kind of where, you know, yes, I think if you had someone like Olmert running saying that I'm actually going to, these are the specific concessions I'm going to get. Like, I'm pretty open about being a sort of a binational democracy guy. But if you had a campaign that set off one candidate saying we're going to give up the West Bank, no bullshit, and pull out of Gaza, versus Netanyahu saying I'm going to annex the West Bank, then I would say you got to vote pragmatically. Right. I would say that. But that doesn't seem to be an option right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm feeling about it. Oh, by the way, like the Centrist Party had like an election ad, and there's this extra that only kind of looks like Sam Seder. I could send it to you by the IM thing.
Okay, that sounds funny. We'll take a look at that.
Okay.
We need Israel to do better, ostensibly. All right, good luck, man. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Good luck. Take care. I feel for leftists in Israel. I mean, I feel kinship with leftists everywhere, obviously, but it really sucks to be on the left in Israel, man.
Yeah, well, you have to join the army.
You have to join the army. You have to, I mean, I think what people really don't understand about, like, there's all these fights between, say, like leftists and liberals or whatever. And some of them are real. Some of them are actual things that matter. Some of them are just sort of silly brand positioning. But you have like a basic, there's some sort of shared parameters on, like, I'm not even talking like ultra woke stuff, but just like super basic, like, hey, racism is bad, right? And I'm telling you, like, you go to Israel, like, that is not the ball game. Like, they're like, they have Moretz is like the closest to like Democratic Party positions on this stuff, and they are totally obscure marginal party at this point. And Labor is not like that. Like, Labor does not echo those same sort of like basic civil society sentiments. Like, it is a massively racist society, and only getting more so.
Oh, but I hear there's a viable candidate who wants to legalize marijuana, so that makes it all okay.
Right. That's a good point. Let's actually play this. This is important. This is some video footage from these what's happening in Israel on Election Day. So several years ago when Netanyahu ran for re-election, he put out a video at the last minute warning that Arabs were coming out to vote. And said and affirmed that he opposed the two-state solution. He reversed himself after he won, but everybody knows what his position is. This time, with the active support of the Trump administration, he's promised to annex the West Bank, which, again, this is just a formalization of what already is so, but that is a formal apartheid declaration. I mean, that is, we are going to, into perpetuity, govern another group of people and control their movements and bodies, and they're not going to have political representation. Now, again, that has been the case for decades, but there's always been the notion that in the mainstream, we'll stop that at some point. And clearly they won't, and clearly that's not where his political coalition is, but they're stepping off of that. Then there's the question of what's inside 67 borders. Is there a real democracy? And it is more complicated, and it's different than obviously being in the West Bank or Gaza, but it is not a full democracy for everybody. And this is reports, and granted, this is some of the complexity of Israel, because in this case, apparently election monitors and police are actually disrupting this. But these are, this is a young man who says he's from Likud and Netanyahu, and he's putting cameras inside Arab voting stations, Arab predominant voting stations, to apparently monitor them while they vote. And the people are saying, what are you doing here? And he's saying, like, I was sent by, like, the governing party to do this. You can hear him saying Likud. Police are confiscating hidden cameras and recording devices.
בסדר, שנייה. זה האזנת סתר, נכון? תוציא את זה, תן לו את זה לשוטר, או תן לי וזהו. יאללה. איזה שעה? אל תיתן לי להתעצבן תוציאו את המחשב נקודה. רגע. בלי רעש. אני בציע משהו. שנייה, זה לא שלך. אני יודע שזה לא שלי, אני רוצה לדעת מה פה. תודה רבה. זהו.
And I think Netanyahu will probably win. I do. I think he'll be returned to power.
What does that make of his corruption charges?
Well, the really interesting thing about the corruption charges is that they're not just standard corruption charges. I mean, they're actually charges that implicate like the free press in Israel, because part of it is using the leverage of Sheldon Adelson has a free newspaper that he prints in Israel that runs pro-government propaganda, essentially. And Netanyahu, part of the charges against him are him leaning on other press outlets for better press coverage, apparently. I don't know. I mean, on the other hand, Israel's like has extremely corrupt politics. And I don't think that, you know, Olmert served a prison sentence for corruption. There's all sorts of allegations against other senior officials. I don't know. I don't think it will make such a big difference, to be honest. I mean, I could be wrong, but I doubt it. Dragon Slayer. I respect Glenn Greenwald, but I think he's been stretching to stand by his argument. For such a smart person to fall back on the argument of the doomsday clock is hard to understand. Sam deserves props for asking about Marcy Wheeler too. Yeah. I mean, I'm somewhere in between Sam and Glenn on this, but I think part of it is really how you frame what the most important lessons are. So I think in terms of the actuality of the investigation in the case, Sam is on very strong ground. To be honest, I would need to re-listen to Marcy Wheeler's appearances, right? And let's also disaggregate between somebody being an asshole about her on Twitter versus the merits of all of her claims. Those are different things, right? So I think like she's somebody that I certainly have respect for. And when I started reading her, it was to understand what happened with the NSA spying on Americans. To be honest, I mean, I recall a certain level of certainty in her interviews, which to me have not panned out, but I really would need to re-listen to those. And I think, you know, valid criticism of her is great. But, you know, not, I mean, Glenn said it, right? Glenn was like, of course you wouldn't apologize for having Marcy Wheeler on. She's a great researcher. So, but I think that the consequences of how this story was covered and obsessed over are more negative, than maybe Sam does. And I think of it primarily in those terms. That's what I'm most concerned about, because I think it was so overhyped that, frankly, short of Donald Trump being frog marched out of the White House, it was overhyped. On the other hand, history didn't stop in 2017. So even over like the last year, it was already way more mellow overall than it was in the first several months of Trump.
Yeah, I just hope all of the liberals who have been using this psychologically to avoid doing real politics or having a total analysis are going to take a second look right now. Maybe it's a teachable moment. And you know what? Maybe there aren't as many of them as I thought there were. I've had some discussions, some debates with Sam about this. So I hope that he's right.
West Coast comrade, if a full-grown brat doll Meg McCain was raised working-class parents, she would now be selling makeup in a Midwestern strip mall to fellow pogs. I don't know what that last part is, but everything else sounds...
I think it's an acronym for something.
It is, yeah. Let's move on.
Oh,
okay, yeah.
All right, well, I got Sammed. I think the first part is very accurate, though. Bugsy, I just listened to yesterday's show. Hard recommend for year-end best of clips. What did we do?
Fun
yesterday?
best over. Nothing like.
What did we do that was so good?
Would that be the
yesterday?
Howard Schultz clip?
No, the Howard Schultz clip.
I assumed you were talking about the climate change doom.
Being sarcastic.
The best of.
Oh, okay.
I'd love to listen to that around Christmas.
I thought it was very good. Not the most uplifting, but important.
No, it's very important. I agree. Gleason, is AOC planting lavender in her community garden? Direct shot at Sam. Sam didn't open the text machine yesterday. Can I get a shofar for my birthday? Yes, you can. Happy birthday, dude. Winnipeg Greg. Where do all the hosts fall in the great Celsius versus Fahrenheit debate? How about metrics versus imperial measurement? Keep in mind, Lula uses Celsius and metric. Well, obviously, then we know which side I'm on.
I'm metric because of Napoleon.
I'm metric because of Lula. Anybody else?
So I've tended to have like an anti-American bias in favor of the metric system. However, I recently moved into an apartment where the oven tells me the temperature in Celsius, and it's very annoying. So now I've kind of turned against it. I don't want to have to do math every time I cook something.
Yeah.
You can't reprogram it?
I have not figured out how to do so. I think the landlord must have got a deal or something.
That's how cheap landlords are in the city. Of course they are. All right. So let's go over this a little bit. There's been the reporting that's coming out of the White House is that apparently Donald Trump is livid that his war on immigrants, his terrorism of the immigrant community is not vicious enough. And he's even floating things like completely shutting down the border. He's very upset about this border wall, right? So I don't know about all of the man's weirdness and oddities and fixations and his obvious bigotry. And obviously this is a huge advantage for, the ever disturbing Stephen Mueller, which we'll get to in a minute. But I think, let's just run through this quickly. Do we have sound of Trump? I just want to read actually a little bit from two reports. So one is from the LA Times, which is that a judge has blocked Trump's policy of forcing asylum seekers to remain in Mexico. So basically what this means is that the Trump administration is telling people, because you know how they frame, always they say, people go through the process, do it legally, do it in the appropriate manner, all of this crap. These are people who are doing it precisely in the legal manner. They're going there, they're applying for asylum. Then they're getting shot out of the country back to Mexico in complete, contradiction of the law. And a judge, Richard Seaborg in San Francisco, has agreed with a request from civil liberties groups to halt the practice while their lawsuits move forward. His decision to put on hold until Friday to give U.S. officials the chance to appeal. And of course they will appeal it, but I just want to give you a sense of what's happening there. Then there's Trump is set to force out and purge top Homeland Security officials. This is from the New York Times. President Trump moved to clear the senior ranks of the Homeland Security on Monday, a day after forcing the resignation of its Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, as he accelerated the purge of the nation's immigration and security leadership. The White House announced the departure of Randolph Ellis, the director of the Secret Service, who had fallen out of favor with the president even before a security breach at his Mar-a-Lago club that the agency effectively blamed on Mr. Trump's employees. Government officials who were asked not to be identified discussing personnel changes before they were announced said that at least 2 to 4 high-ranking officials affiliated with Ms. Nielsen were expected to be leaving soon, hollowing out the top echelon of the department managing border security, presidential safety, counterterrorism, natural disasters, customs, and other matters. Now, we'll get to the sound in a second, but this comes on the heels of, and we've already know that the family separation policy, the damage that it's inflicted on families, the terrorism of those kidnappings are still playing out. In the sense that children have not been reunited with their parents. They're still separate from their families because of this horrific obscenity that they stopped. Well, now, and this again is from the New York Times, Trump signals even fiercer immigration agenda with possible return of family separations. President Trump's purge of the nation's top Homeland Security officials is a sign that he's preparing to unleash an even fiercer assault on immigration, including a possible return of his controversial decision last summer to separate migrant children from their parents. Again, let's be clear, kidnapped children from their parents, current and former administration officials said on Monday. Mr. Trump shook up the ranks of his top immigration officials after spending months demanding that they take tougher action to stop a surge in migrant families at the border and seething at what he considers to be their overly legalistic refusal to do what he said was necessary. This is also the other major political reality, is that the Trump economic populism scam is done. So Bernie's been running very effective ads actually reminding people of Trump's lies on universal health care, of safeguarding Medicare and Social Security. And while we can debate endlessly what role his economic populism played in winning the 2016 election, there's no doubt that it played at least a small but significant role in geographically pivotal states. That's undeniable, just as it's undeniable that a vast majority of people who voted for him were motivated by the white nationalist message. But with that economic populism done, sure, he'll lie and he'll spin, but that's not going to be his bailiwick. It has to be all 100% in this white nationalism. Yeah.
God. And like, just to give you some idea of what it means when they send asylum seekers back to Mexico, we actually, our producer Andy interviewed a guy on the Antifada who was seeking asylum because back in Honduras, his dad was tortured and killed because he was going to testify on the connection between the police and organized crime.
Oh,
and they told him if he didn't, they told him that he and the rest of his family would be next. And he needed to keep his mouth shut. So he fled. He applied for asylum just the way you're supposed to, from Tijuana. They called his number last week. He was held in the U.S. for a few days, and then they sent him back, at which point he had quit his job to go to the U.S. He had a low-paying job in Tijuana, and now he has nothing. He has no money to live on. His living situation is tenuous. Like, this is what it does to people's lives.
Absolutely. And this is Donald Trump saying that our country is full. You're going to hear this more and more and more. This is going to be one of the most barbarous, overtly fascistic campaigns. I mean, it's going to be more so than 2016.
It's a colossal surge, and it's overwhelming our immigration system, and we can't let that happen. So as I say, and this is our new statement, the system is full, can't take you anymore. Whether it's asylum, whether it's anything you want, it's illegal immigration, can't take you anymore. We can't take you. Our country is full, our area is full, the sector is full. Can't take you anymore. I'm sorry. Can't happen. So turn around. That's the way it is.
So, look, and the argument against this, we could say all day that, in fact, there is not migration has stabilized entirely over the last several years. I believe it's actually at a net negative, or at the very least evened out. That the amount of asylum seekers that we take from anywhere in the world is incredibly small, even under less authoritarian and bigoted administrations. But that's not the point. I mean, the point is this is pure racism. This is pure xenophobia. This is pure fear-mongering. So you need to argue it on the merits, and you need to have an answer to it, and it needs to mean substantively abolishing ICE, as an example. I'm afraid, and I'm really, like, people can say their piece. I'm not really particularly interested in having this argument at the moment, but I think that we need to, look, is my goal politically at some point open borders? Yeah, absolutely. No doubt. The immediate use of that terminology is not as effective as things like demilitarizing the border, because that is an actual within the real world policy option right now. And when you get specific like that, that is how you can both aim at Trump and force Democratic candidates to have much more specifically filled out and clear immigration agendas. And I know I'm speaking indirectly here, but that's honestly like my stance on Sanders. I want him and all of the candidates to move leftward on immigration in some respects and take this on in a very aggressive way because it's fundamentally important. And that is not going to happen through our more utopian discourse on open borders, which, again, I'll say for a second time, I am not opposed to. That is part of a longer term project. In the short term right now, the question is, do you demilitarize? Do you abolish ICE? Do you coordinate the United States with international law on things like asylum? And do you fundamentally reframe the parameters of this conversation so that it is one of humanity versus exploitation, race, and capital? That is the question. And if you frame it correctly, then you can actually both attack Trump and move the party in a more substantive direction. Because even the ones that have signified in the right way on this, the specifics of their things like abolish ICE plans are very they're threadbare. They're talking about renaming an agency in some cases. We need to be much more specific about demilitarizing the border and supporting Mexico and doing the same process. And then more broadly, if you want to stop this, you need to start supporting, sweatshop economies and right-wing governments in Central America, because we're part of that same chain that Jamie talked about before.
Yeah, so I mostly agree with you. However, I do think Bernie needs to frame it differently. What he said kind of played into the right-wing talking point that immigration is bad for U.S. workers and would force the U.S. to impose some sort of austerity, which is just not true. Like, I think we all need to do a good job, and I think we have a lot of work to do, judging from my mentions on Twitter right now, connecting in people's minds the fact that quote-unquote open borders or immigration of workers, it's not a neoliberal Koch brothers idea. We already have open borders for capital. We already have open borders for the wealthy. And it's not a coincidence, as Daniel Denver noted in an excellent Twitter thread, that the criminalization of migration and the beefing up of quote-unquote border security coincided with predatory trade deals like NAFTA that enabled U.S. corporations to exploit workers abroad, as well as exploit workers here, because when you're criminalized, when you're undocumented, it's much harder to organize and form a union with your fellow workers.
Yeah, I mostly agree with that. I mean, I think more broadly for people in like Twitter Spaces and other things, you got to be very conscious that, as an example, over 80% of Americans oppose open borders. So I'm interested in, though, on the other hand, picking off the types of issues and conversations that really could get to the heart of the human rights and basic dignity crisis at the border. And that also includes decoupling and debunking myths like immigration is bad. Here's the thing that's so amazing to me. If you want to know what labor's position on immigration is, it's really simple. You can go to the AFL-CIO website, which is hardly like the most radical, union in the world, but it's a venerable and honorable big union that represents millions of people. And they are 100% on board with solidarity and rights work in those countries, and also robust, for real immigration reform. Here it is. Support pathway to citizenship. This is the ACLU's sort of main point here. So there is also, just like as a matter of practicality, there isn't, but
yeah, and I think the rhetoric also could change, and I understand that open borders is often a boogeyman used to scare people. Because yes, most Americans oppose it if you put it in those terms, but also most Americans are in favor of immigration.
Yeah,
so,
no, absolutely. I mean, look, and it's just
Bernie's got to fight those fights, but he also has to reject certain premises that are really problematic about immigration and the economy. And he just needs to find a way. He doesn't have to say, yeah, I'm for open borders, but he needs to find a way to put it in his words that rejects the premises of those sorts of questions.
I agree with that, and I also am going to still continue largely to give him the benefit of the doubt, because most of his career suggests that we should give him the benefit of the doubt. And I get, there are times where it's like, guys, he's running for president of the United States. He's not running to be like a study group leader at, a DSA meeting. Like, this is a little bit of a different job, and sometimes he's not going to echo your talking points. Now, that being said, I totally agree that he should have framed it differently, and I think he will. That's how I see it will happen. So let's go to Sudan, where there are major movements taking place across the country. The security forces are aiming guns and tear gas on people, and the military is, in some cases, actually protecting people. Now, this movement started a couple of months ago as fundamentally an anti-austerity movement. As in some ways you could look at actually the uprisings in Egypt and Tunisia that way as well. Alexandria, the second city in Egypt, is a very high concentration of labor power. And there was a huge impetus for that movement coming from labor. And I think one of the very interesting things about how Sudan has gotten so little press is that several years ago, when there's a huge amount of focus on the crimes that the Omar al-Bashir was committing in Darfur as an example, Sudan was on a lot of the sort of top line media and liberal concern group focuses. In the last couple of years, not only has Sudan fallen out of focus, even as abuses and atrocities have continued, this austerity uprising has barely been noticed until really quite recently. And I think it should be noted that Omar al-Bashir has sort of in some ways worked his way back into global good standing by, of course, actually helping Eurozone nations with vicious anti-migrant policies. So this is empowered by students and it's empowered by labor unions. It doesn't rely on the traditional opposition parties as much. At the same time, I think anytime you sort of, practically they should be appealing to the military, but we also saw what happened in Egypt, and that was a tragedy. Essentially, it wasn't a revolution. It was essentially a military-enabled head of state change. But regardless of that sort of cautionary note, this is also just people with incredible courage risking their lives to fight a regime that's ran that. Omar al-Bashir, I think, has been in power since the late 80s, and this is just incredible courage and correct demands that we should be in solidarity with. So let's just play some of these clips. This one is iconic. This woman singing here. We could play this. They've been doing this for months. This is going on for several months now. And this is another, the tweet from Nasreen Malik. This is a soldier calling on the rest of his rank to join the people, and he's make sure he's being recorded before he starts this clip. And absolutely, he and others could absolutely face execution for doing this. This is incredible courage here. Let's play some of that. Yeah. He's making sure that he's being recorded while he does this, and he's calling on his fellow soldiers to join in the army to basically protect the revolution. And in some cases, there have been barracks that have been opened for revolutionaries to protect themselves. And this is interesting, though. This is very different because, in Egypt, there was this sort of I wonder the extent to which the difference, because these guys are just, this is revolutionary bottom-up activity right here. These are ground level soldiers responding and wanting the change too. I don't know what the leadership of the military is in this position, but this is incredibly inspiring. And I think, very revealing that Sudan was at the top of the agenda when it was, absolutely a story of atrocities and abuse, but it's not at the top of the agenda when it's people with actually, I think, some similarities in terms of austerity and wealth concentration and authoritarian politics of the right-wing variety that you might find in many other parts of the world, including obviously the United States right now, or Brazil in some respects. This is also a cross-religious and cross-ethnic movement, which is really important. And Omar al-Bashir has been a master of using these types of things to divide his populace. And time might be running out for him, and we can only hope so.
It's amazing to watch this sort of scene, which has happened in so many different places across the globe and so many different types of revolutions, except this time it's covered with, he's got the megaphone and they got cell phones around him. It's it's a different kind of world.
It's a very different world.
Also, people are displaying agency right now. I feel like the mainstream press is more interested in the Sudanese people or whoever when they're just these suffering masses, and when they are joining together and taking action, they're
Well, it's much easier.
Freaked out by it.
It's much easier for the media to take sort of an NGO report and make that into a news peg than try to figure out what's actually happening independent of that. Those sorts of data gathering organizations.
Right. Let's go back to what's happening with migration briefly. So what this means in terms of the Trump administration is that Stephen Miller is empowered, and he's definitely like the cockroach of this regime, and incredibly resilient and effective, and obviously has this, sick symbiotic relationship to Trump and knows how to play to all of his worst tendencies and is his worst and most obscene, grotesque tendencies. So what does this lead to? It leads to Ilhan Omar, the best member of Congress, the one with the most courage and clarity and basic conviction and willingness to say things as they are.
Girl boss.
She's definitely Somalia boss. Girl boss. Ilhan Omar.
Refugee boss.
Ilhan Omar says the absolute obvious about Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is a white nationalist. The fact that he still has an influence on policy and political appointments is an outrage, of course. Don Jr., the big, the idiot trying to get his dad's approval, quote tweets this. Now, again, this is within days of somebody being arrested for planning to assassinate Ilhan Omar. And we should be remembering, that the incitement against her by these people is as obscene as the fact that her own Democratic leadership has not fully had her back in this environment as well. Don Jr. says, I see that the head of the Farrakhan fan club at Ilhan Omar took a break from spewing her usual anti-Semitic bigotry today to accuse a Jewish man of being a white nationalist because apparently she has no shame. Ironically, this is like just pure dumb token identity politics and is a great example of using identity to evade from substance. In fact, Stephen Miller is widely recognized as being a white nationalist, including even by appalled and horrified members of his own family. And so this leads to this follow-up. Joel Pollack really just, God, Stephen Miller and Joe Pollack in one segment, God. Joel Pollack writes, Stephen Miller is a Jew, an American Jew, and a patriot, not a quote-unquote white nationalist. I don't believe you should be calling a Jew anything, Miss Omar. Okay, so this is, and I have to say,
do not address him.
Don't respond to him, but I just have to say, if you are concerned about people not taking the stain and threat of anti-Semitism seriously, point your finger at these motherfuckers. No one has done more to turn something that is so toxic and pernicious in our world that it has led to the murder of millions and millions of Jewish people into a borderline joke than a Joe Pollack or a Don Jr. It's disgusting. And Rep. Mark Pocan from Wisconsin points out the pretty obvious, or raises the pretty obvious question here. Last year, I called Stephen Miller a white nationalist, but Rep. Lee Zeldin and Donald Trump Jr., Lee Zeldin also got in on this, never accused me of anti-Semitism. Rather than attacking at Ilhan Omar, why don't they stand up to white nationalism and President Trump's support for quote-unquote very fine people? Well, I think we all know the answer to that because I'm going to do an omnibus. They're all white nationalists.
Well, speaking, I think we have the sheriff of white nationalism, Richard Spencer, weighed in on this in a Vanity Fair profile of Miller from 2017. Spencer says he first became aware of Miller at Duke after the start of the lacrosse scandal. He certainly understood the media and how to get his message out there, Spencer says. I could only be impressed. The two met at the Duke Conservative Union in 2006. I bet that's a great place. Being a few years older in graduate school, Spencer says, he mentored Miller. But I do think that Stephen probably would have ended up more or less where he is today, whether he had met me or not. He's his own man. He is a strong American nationalist, you could say. American nationalist. Spencer says, certainly not a white nationalist, but he is an American nationalist and civic nationalist or a public nationalist. Spencer praises Miller for having had the guts to support the lacrosse players when it was unpopular to do so. It was racial politics at its heart, and whenever you touch on that case, you're playing with fire. So, yeah.
So is Richard Spencer, are we calling him an anti-Semite? Oh, wait, I think we are, actually, in fact. You're calling from a 530 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, hold on a second. Let me take you off speakerphone, please.
Sure. Hello?
Okay.
What's your name? Where are you calling from?
This is the passive-aggressive progressive. I'm calling from Chico, California.
Hey, what's going on, dude?
I called in yesterday.
Okay.
I called in yesterday to talk about the 2020 race,
Uh-huh.
and I had some problems with my phone. I wasn't able, and it was into the show, so whatever.
It's a new call.
So
It's a new call. What do you got? What do you got now? Let's go.
So, can you guarantee me that Bernie Sanders will win
No.
both the primary and...
Can I guarantee you that? No. I can't guarantee you anything, dude.
I'll guarantee it.
Okay, Brendan will guarantee
can
it.
you guarantee
I'm a
me
very powerful witch.
if
I will
Bernie
also.
does not win the primary,
Yes.
that any of his supporters will vote for the candidate that does win?
No, I can't. Why are you calling with such nonsense? I can't guarantee what other people will do, and I can't guarantee a future scenario.
Can you
What's
say
his concern
that
motivated?
Yeah,
there
what are
will
we
be
what are we
some-
doing?
not
What's the purpose
guaranteed,
of the
but-
call? What's the purpose of the call? Don't do.
So I'm a little worried that if Sanders isn't the nominee, that there's a few voters that might not
Okay,
vote
well,
for
I'm
the-
worried that if Sanders is, that there's a few voters that won't. So let's just have the primary out and see what happens. Thanks for
Wait.
the call. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
I mean, the
Yeah.
number.
So I don't
Hold on, let me ask you something.
No, I don't want to do this.
There's no do you have any?
I got another call. I'm sorry. I don't want to. It's ridiculous. Like we haven't even started voting yet. Like, get your head here. You're calling from a 510 area code. Who are you? And if history is anything to go by, less than 10% of Bernie voters didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. So let's stay with that.
Which is a much better percentage than in the previous election.
Yes, it's a Jesus fucking Christ.
The self-gaslighting of like Democrats and liberals to say like we need to have someone who's electable is such a self-own.
I think we
at the end
should
of this.
remember that phone number and maybe give him one more chance before ignoring it.
Noted.
Well, look, if there was
Yeah.
some strong empirical evidence that someone other than Bernie was like way,
That's-
way more likely to beat Trump, I might have to consider it. But guess what? There's not.
You're calling from a 510 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
You know what it is when I call, man. You know what time it is when I call, man.
It's the exact opposite.
on,
It's the exact opposite time of what it just was. I'll tell you what.
My God, man. You letting dudes from Chico and them 5-year-old Redding and them call? No. We not doing that. It's 510. It's Oakland. It's the Bay Area. All right?
How you
No,
doing?
none of that right now, man. Well, what if Superman picked me up right now and we flew away together, motherfucker? Shit.
Right.
That's a
I
strong
don't want to
counterpoint.
hear that shit.
Thank you.
So yeah, Mike, you know, my name is Cole James Cash.
Yes, sir.
I now run the GNN Channel 10, patreon.com/GNN Channel 10, Ghetto News Network, man.
This is a really
Thank
good
you for
show.
shouting me out earlier. It's much
It's
appreciated.
a really, really good show.
You know,
I've been enjoying it.
Well, thank you. I'm calling because, first of all, you know, I want to say that anybody who ever said that they want to support Black and Latino businesses, you can go to patreon.com/channel10 for $2. All right? $2.
I've
Let me
done
tell you
it.
something, Jamie.
I'm a patron.
If you support Black businesses, hit up the Patreon. Matt, if you support Black businesses, Latino businesses, hit up the Patreon. Otherwise, I don't want to hear it.
Sounds fair to
You
me.
know?
That's right.
But not for real, man. You guys have shown me a lot of support, man. I'm just being belligerent and self-promoting.
Go for
But
it.
I just want to say that, first of all, man, this Friday, me and Ronald Reagan, we doing a joint podcast, man. It's an episode for both our shows.
That is fucking cool.
Crossover
This I
episode.
like. That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
How
they
can
calling
people-
it
how
the
can-
MR Extended Universe, man.
How can people listen to it or watch it?
See, now I'm looking stupid. It's gonna be a joint episode, meaning so I'm gonna post it on my SoundCloud.
Okay,
He's
got
gonna
it.
post it wherever he posts his where he posts his. So basically, it's gonna be an episode for both of our shows.
Now you're on
You know,
SoundCloud, but are you on iTunes yet? Can people subscribe on iTunes yet?
You know what? I have an issue with my stupid iTunes account, but they can find it on Google Play.
Okay, Google
or
Play.
Google whatever.
Okay.
You know.
Or
But
just
yeah, I
listen
haven't
on
set that up
Patreon
yet,
after
but
you become a
basically,
patron.
Yeah, either you can go to patreon.com/GNN Channel 10 or soundcloud.com/GNN Channel 10. And Michael, I will be seeing you next Saturday, man.
Yes,
I
sir.
will be pulling up.
Awesome.
I will be there.
TMBS
yes,
left
I will
is
be
best.
wearing a mask.
Yes.
No, I will not be showing my face.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And it's not my fault if 35 women are surrounded by me and want to get a glimpse of me, man. It's not my fault, Mike. I can't do nothing about that, man.
You're welcome to it.
Okay. But yeah, nonetheless, I'm really looking forward to being there. I appreciate all the support you guys have given and shown me. You know what I'm saying? And one thing I can honestly say is that when I present stories, I present them as just a regular person. I don't pretend to be an intellectual. And what I notice for a lot of people of color, man, that they want that, man. They don't want people dancing around shit. Right. They want just a direct, not giving these people intellectual quarter. Ben Shapiro should not have intellectual quarter.
Right.
Dave Rubin should not have intellectual quarter. You call these people what the fuck they are. And all this, we should debate them. Fucking debate. Discuss why he looks so fucked up. Discuss why he's so stupid.
How would you respond?
Steadily trying to. Go ahead.
How would you respond to the call that we just got? Like, let me do it. I have a hypothetical question for you. Can you guarantee that Bernie Sanders will win the primary?
I mean, like I can guarantee that Kim Kardashian gonna put a booty in my face. I don't know. I would want that. We all have things.
I would want that.
It don't mean it's gonna happen.
Thank you. That's clarifying.
I mean, I'm just saying, man. Like that's what I'm saying. Like, calling with these hypotheticals, man.
That's the worst.
And Michael, man,
Yeah.
I gotta warn you. I will be stealing the mic at your show, man.
We'll see about
stealing
that.
it. I'm
We'll
gonna do a WWE run-in.
We'll see.
I'm gonna steal it. We just got a black world championship in WWE. We just finally got a black champion. I'm feeling myself right now. I'm gonna get kicked out the show and all that.
Well, that's a hypothetical, my friend. So
it's a hypothetical.
Yeah.
You're right.
I can't wait to see you,
yeah,
man.
I'm gonna go
check
ahead.
it. I can't wait to see you. Everybody, check it out. Tell them again one more time before you get off. Seriously, this is
Absolutely.
like the episode you did on MS-13 was like that. What like this honestly, like there's a lot of subtleties that people need to understand about a lot of stories, and you're picking up threads that other people aren't picking up. Like people, seriously, check it out. Tell them one more time where they can find it.
Well, before I even tell them, man, that MS-13 story was some of the deepest work that I've done, because I feel like no journalist addressed all the little intricacies that go into why MS can't expand, why the 13 in their name basically restricts them permanently, and why here in California, the home of gangbanging, MS ain't got it like that. They ain't running no hoods like that, especially not up here. They ain't got it like that. And you should be looking at what it took for them to even form a gang. But even more so, I've looked into what happened in the past that led to jackasses like Elliot Abrams excusing murder of pastors, murder of, a Catholic bishop, murder and rape and beheading of women and children, that led to the mentality that had them to even form the game out in Los Angeles. I went into all of that.
No,
you can reach me at patreon.com/GNN Channel 10, soundcloud.com/GNN Channel 10.
Thank you, man. See you soon.
Nah, no problem, Mike. I'll be seeing you soon. You got my number, man. And everybody, when you call, hurry up and say what the fuck you got to say before you get your shit cut off. You get clowned by me on my show. I got time for the bullshit. All right, Mike.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I love that inside-outside strategy because everybody thinks I'm so tough on callers, but that is an example of what I would be like if I was actually tough on callers. I think I'm very patient.
He said it, so you don't have to.
Thank you. That was great.
Just cut the prefaces, guys.
Yeah, just get
introductory material.
to it.
Gotta be quick.
Just seriously, gotta be quick.
Gotta jump.
Think about the fact that Lula's in prison before you do one of your fucking hypotheticals. We are going to talk about that. So on this past Sunday, by the way, people are asking where I've got these Lula shirts. I was at a teach-in at the People's Forum on Saturday in Manhattan, and I bought them directly to support a local solidarity group. And they might want to do some stuff with me, so I'll see, and hopefully I'll have a pathway for people to get the tees. So I'll just put that out. Again, obviously, if you're following me, you know that this story means a tremendous amount to me. And I think that it needs to mean a tremendous amount to everybody because it is a symbol of all of the sort of main trends of our world. Generic anti-corruption politics is the handmaiden of fascism. If you don't have a discussion of corruption politics that is structural, that deals with markets, that deals with sequestered wealth, that deals with oligarchy, that deals with capital, then it's going to be just a sort of moralistic tool that will play in the hands of demagogues, Trump, Bolsonaro, Modi, and so on. Also, Lula, again, as an individual, was an extraordinary leader. He helped lead Brazil out of a military dictatorship in the 80s. At this event on Saturday, one of the speakers was a director of global strategy, I believe, for, I think, the Food and Commercial Workers Union. And he first met Lula in 1981 when he was doing solidarity work while Lula was in prison by the Brazilian military junta. And he said, ever since then, he and Lula stayed in touch, and that any time Lula visited the United States, including as president, he always met with labor unions right after he had met with his counterpart. So when he met George W. Bush in 2003, within the next hour, he was at AFL-CIO headquarters. And one conversation, Lula told him one of the main ag conglomerates in the United States is actually a Brazilian multinational. And he's like, Lula would tell me what's going on. I'll talk to them if you're giving your people problems. He was a trade unionist leader in a way that there were definitely been other heads of state that were trade unionists, but not necessarily all of them demonstrated the same level of continuity of commitment, the same achievement of bringing 30 million to 40 million people out of poverty, massively expanding healthcare and education, labor protections, and resetting Brazilian foreign policy. This is a tremendously important leader in a strategically vital country. This is one of the biggest countries in the world and the biggest country in Latin America. And if you don't think that the governance of Brazil affects you or any place that you might be interested in, you're frankly not assessing it properly. So there were mass demonstrations. Again, he's in jail with absolutely no material evidence. They have put into solitary confinement, only allow him to meet with his lawyers now for 30 minutes at a time, have blocked his communications, kept him out of the presidential race, which he comfortably led over Bolsonaro without a shred of material evidence. I would be the first one to tell you that if they found Lula on some petty corruption charge, I would still say what he has accomplished for people far outweighs it. I'm honestly shocked that in an effort that has cost this amount of money and had this many resources put into it with the backing of the DOJ, that they have not found anything is actually mind-blowing. It's shocking. And if you talk to people around the Workers' Party, they'll say, no, Lula actually was quite careful because he knew that he couldn't make a single mistake if he was going to be the first bottom to the top president of Brazil. This is a report from Michael Fox in the World News Network, and then I'll read briefly. Lula published an op-ed in Brazil's largest daily, the first op-ed they've let him publish in a year. But these are from some of the protests in Curitiba on Sunday.
Brazilian Congresswoman Benedita da Silva read a letter from former President Dilma Rousseff.
Even in prison, you are the greatest enemy of the neo-fascism that is threatening us. Over these 365 days of unjust imprisonment, you have shown the Brazilian people that it is possible to resist even in the worst conditions.
Lula was arrested last year after he was convicted of accepting a beachside apartment from a company seeking government contracts. But his conviction was based on plea bargain testimony and scant evidence. He and his supporters have always maintained his innocence.
Lula left office in 2009. Then suddenly, in 2017, after his name was floated as a potential presidential candidate, supposed evidence began to surface, although none of it was concrete. So you start to think, all right, something is not right here.
It's a smart kid. Brian Mayer at the Brazil Wire, which I always shout out, and you need to read that site, has translated this piece from Folha de Sao Paulo, and the title is "Why Is There So Much Fear of a Free Lula?" And Lula writes, among other things, Today, it's clear that my conviction was part of a political movement which started after the re-election of President Dilma Rousseff in 2014. Beaten at the ballot box for the fourth consecutive time, the opposition chose the road to coup to return to power, restarting the authoritarian addiction of the dominant Brazilian classes. The coup of impeachment without a crime of responsibility was enacted against the model of development with social inclusion which the country had been building since 2003. In 12 years, we created 20 million new jobs, lifted 30 million people out of extreme poverty, increased the GDP fivefold, we opened universities of millions excluded, and overcame hunger. This model was unacceptable to the privileged and prejudiced layers of society. There were powerful economic interests from outside Brazil. While the pre-salt petroleum reserves drew the greed of foreign petroleum corporations, Brazilian companies began to compete for markets with traditional exporters from other countries. Mark Blythe talked about this several years ago and how the workers' government actually leveraged mid-sized Brazilian corporations to become multinationals and then funneled the money back into social programs at home. Lula concludes, why is there so much fear of a free Lula? If they achieved the goal of blocking my election, is there nothing to sustain this imprisonment? The truth is that what they are afraid of is the organization of the people who identify with our national project. They're afraid that they will have to recognize arbitrary actions that they committed to an elected, incapable president who fills us with shame. They know that my freedom is an important part of the return of democracy to Brazil, but they are incapable of coexisting with a democratic process. That's 100% true. We need to stay on this. I would ask any single Democratic presidential candidate that you have an opportunity to ask a question, what are you going to do about this? Both as a political prisoner and also broadly, the reassertion of a U.S. Permanent coup and interference stance in Latin America, which... Again, the coup against Manuel Zelaya in Honduras in 2009, which was backed by Hillary Clinton at the State Department, is incredibly important for understanding this reversal. It starts under Obama and accelerates under Trump. Bush tried, but apparently it's just part of the kind of sick ironies of history was that they were so consumed with waging global war in the Middle East and South Asia that they had less time to interfere in Latin America. You're calling from a 913 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? 913. Nope. Boom, boom, boom. You're calling from a 305 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Sort of. You're not on speaker, are you?
Oh shit, yeah, it's still on my beat.
Now you're a lot better. If you're good like that, what's your name?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yeah. Romeo, I'm calling from the Bay Area. I'm a student at Stanford, and I'm an organizer with SJP. So I just wanted to put out a plug if there are any listeners in the Bay Area. We're bringing Eli Valley. You might know him?
Yep, sure.
Yeah, I just had him on my show.
Yes, sorry, Jamie?
I said, yeah, I just had him on the Antifada.
Sick. Yeah, so we're having him over for Palestine Awareness Week. SJP chapters usually do like a week of programming around Palestine. So if anyone in the Bay Area who's listening is going to be around, follow us on our Facebook page, Stanford Students for Justice in Palestine, and we'll have like flyers and information and a week of programming up. So just a quick plug for that. And I also just wanted to thank you guys for all the work y'all do. I'm a longtime listener, but I'm a student, so I'm usually like listening like at night or something. And like especially to Michael, like all of your programming around Lula is like just really, really, really good.
Thanks, man.
And it's been like really important in like just talking to like friends and family back home who I'm my area code's 305, so I'm from Miami, and I'm like around a lot of like really rich Latin American folks, and it's like definitely warped my perspective on like politics in the U.S. and abroad. And it's been like a really great way of like helping me reframe how I, view the world and stuff. So yeah, huge like shout out to you guys for all the work you do.
Honored, man. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And people go see Eli Valley, and thanks for your organizing work at Stanford, man.
Yeah. Also like, I just like a quick ask. I'd really love to see a little bit on your show or whatever you're doing work, a little more coverage on Guatemala. My dad's Guatemalan. He migrated to the United States when he was 17 during the Rios Montt dictatorship, and like his uncle was disappeared, or was killed, but disappeared when my dad's uncle was organizing against the Rios Montt dictatorship. So that kind of shit means a lot to me, and there's a lot going on similar to Lula in terms of criminalizing the Social Democratic Party.
Okay.
Thelma Aldana is her name, and I don't know. It'd be cool to.
So my thing with
covering.
I would love to talk about that more. So my thing is there's places I have more grounding in. I have a little bit of grounding in Brazil. I have a touch of grounding in Haiti, and then I kind of try to work based off of that. So I've been doing a lot more Haiti coverage on my show. So as far as something like Guatemala goes, if you could, obviously, if you're a TMBS patron, you can just hit me on Discord with resources, but you can also tweet at me or whatever else. I'd love to do more on a place like Guatemala. I just need to know where to start. But definitely.
Yeah. I can't afford to subscribe for your Patreon.
You're a student. Hit me on the side. Hit me on the side. we could figure that out.
For sure. Yeah, I will.
Yep.
Because there's just so much ridiculous shit going on in Guatemala. Our president's kind of like a joke version of Reagan. He's
totally
like a TV comedian, funny shit.
I'm all for doing more Guatemala coverage.
What's
all
up
about
with all
it.
these right-wing ghouls who
Thanks,
just
man.
look like
Appreciate
clowns?
the call.
Seems to add insult to injury.
Who are you talking about? Elliot Abrams?
he said that the president was like a TV comedian.
You're calling from a 20. I don't know. This is weird. You're calling from a 205 area. Definitely though, hit me up. I will cover more Guatemala. You're calling from a 205 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
My name's Taiwan. I'm calling from Birmingham, Alabama.
I'm sorry. Will you tell me your name again? Sorry. Name one more time.
Taiwan.
Calling from Birmingham, Alabama. What's on your minds?
All right. I wanted to ask this months ago when Dumpty Cons was on the show.
Okay.
But this has to do with the coup talk that was happening in Britain with Jeremy Corbyn.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea how we would go about organizing around the death or the incapacitation of our leadership? Because that's what happened in Brazil, basically.
You're talking you're saying if Bernie gets elected, in the you're talking.
Bernie gets elected, Bernie gets assassinated, Bernie gets arrested, any kind of roadblock like that.
I will say that the situation in Brazil, the institutions are less powerful in a place like Brazil. But I think in general, and I hate giving generic left-wing advice like this, but I think in a case like this, and by the way, this is true even barring a bad scenario, right? If you elect Jeremy Corbyn prime minister or Bernie Sanders president, I feel exhausted even saying this, but it's going to be so much more work after they're elected. I'm not saying it's going to be a Herculean task to get them elected. It's going to take an unbelievable amount. But Bernie Sanders is a Democratic frontrunner right now, and he could totally get elected president. And as soon as that guy is elected, there's going to be a transition period where people should take a rest. But we are going to need to be so civically engaged to support the agenda and take on all of the interests that even passing something like single payer healthcare would mean taking on, that to me, you really got to be out in the street, literally and figuratively. And honestly, I think that does have something to do, because partially, yeah. So that's not as specific
we'll
as
cross
you'd
that bridge when we come to it.
I'm saying we'll cross that bridge, and hopefully we won't come to it. But regardless, you need to be out to have an inside-outside agenda for these leaders. Thanks for the call, man.
And it is possible here. Our institutions are a bit stronger, but sectors of the ruling class wanted to stage a coup against FDR.
That's true.
And if you've watched the plot against Harold Wilson, you know that there was some funny business going on there in the UK, and it absolutely could happen here.
Definitely.
I think I think it was easier in previous media environments to do something that I guess say out in the open, things like that. I mean, I don't know. I think generally this is kind of focusing too much on the individual as like the sort of guardian of the movement. And the point I think you were making, Michael, is like you have to widen this beyond that individual. It's going to take a lot more than that individual. And Bernie Sanders is old anyway, right? Like,
I mean, it's really important who is president, and like that's cannot be overstated. But again, even in this like less catastrophic scenario, that's another reason that Bernie's the best candidate, right? If you watch his speeches, he's telling you, you need to be out there to help me do this. It isn't just that I have great policy ideas. It isn't just that I have a, idea about how to work the bureaucracy. I'm going to take on some pretty fundamental fights. I think the phrase now that is floating around is he's like a class warrior social democrat, which is actually a decent, if you care about these reframes. I don't particularly, but he gets it. That is where he is actually, in fact, a socialist. Like, he really does have an understanding of class politics and mobilization. And he's saying, you need to do this with me. And that is just a true of any ambitious progressive project, even barring these more, these other scenarios.
Yeah. I mean, I'm more concerned about measures that the boss class is going to take, not like a violent coup necessarily, but just to block all of the things that we want to get passed via a Sanders government. Like
Totally.
A capital strike is a very real possibility, and, all kinds of other legal funny business.
Well, what they're going to do with the courts, I mean, there's going to be, and even again, like, even if you look statewide at all of the criminalization of protests that have already been passed, like, sometimes those like coup conversations are problematic because it's both like, I don't think it's exactly going to look like something that you would see in Brazil. And then on the other hand, it already is here. Like you're passing laws on state levels that absolutely criminalize people's civil ability to protest private corporations. That already is on the books.
They're just trying to protect the right to run over protesters with your car.
Right.
Which part of the Bill of Rights is that?
Right. Exactly. Let's do a final piece of sound. This was just no, this isn't. All right, let's just do two quick pieces of sound. I think this is important. This is Henry Louis Gates. Was on Joe Scarborough this morning. And again, you need to connect, in my mind, the terrorism and attempt to ethnically cleanse America through these ICE and immigration policies with voter suppression. It's a strategic white supremacy. And this is really the part where, like, the fact that there are some real ghouls and goblins in this administration who really believe this stuff, and people like Paul Ryan, who I'm sure, like, oh, I don't want to be associated with that, but they have absolutely the same agenda, and partially it's a power agenda, right? This is designing your electorate. And Henry Louis Gates is going to explain to Scarborough the scale of voter suppression taking place in the Trump era, paved by the Roberts Court gutting the Voting Rights Act, as an example.
And it's a myth to think that it was only the South rising again. You're absolutely right. It was confluence of events. The North and the South grew weary of Reconstruction. Grant initially suppressed the Ku Klux Klan. Remember, the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery is ratified on December 6, 1865, about the same time that the Klan is born. And Grant suppresses the Klan in the early years of his administration. But after that, his re-election and the panic of 1873, which is officially called the Great Depression, interest in the North grew weary as well. Do we really need to commit all these resources for these former slaves? Didn't we free them? They should be on their own. Can't they stand on their own 2 feet? And so starting in 1890, the former Confederate states had started constitutional conventions that suppressed the black vote. I'll give you a dramatic example. In 1898, there were 130,000 black men registered to vote in Louisiana. By 1904, that number had been reduced to 1,342. Think about that.
And that happened in large part because the terror campaigns, because of the Klan, because governments weren't weren't doing their jobs? Is this what we're going to also read about in Stony the Road?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Look, voter suppression and a very conservative Supreme Court that in 1883 declared the Civil Rights Act of 1875 unconstitutional. So think about it. 12 years of black freedom followed by an alt-right rollback and a president who refused to renounce white supremacy, Andrew Johnson. Does this sound familiar?
Absolutely.
I was reading
exactly right.
Robert Paxton's The Anatomy of Fascism, and we often focus, I think rightly, on the capitalism angle of what leads to fascism, but Robert Paxton makes a convincing case that that the Klan was actually maybe the first fascist organization we've had, and a sort of response to increased franchisement and sort of like bringing in more people into the political process. They realized we need something to rile up our people too. Like the difference between authoritarianism and fascism is fascism likes the people riled up. Authoritarianism wants them excluded as much as possible.
Right. All right, we'll take a final call. You're calling from an 850 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello?
Yes, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, my name is Robert. I'm from Florida.
Hey, Robert.
You guys were talking about this thing about, like, talking to, like, normies and stuff like that. And I was thinking, like, probably the best position to take would be kind of more like a democracy first kind of position. Like, because I think, like, I mean, on the right, you kind of have, like, democracy kind of weaponized. Like, you have these Elliot Abrams kind of, like, we got to go into Venezuela and stuff like that. I mean, it's a great way to, like, take that away. And it's also something that, like, pretty much anybody.
I don't understand what you're. I'm sorry. I don't understand what you're talking about.
Well, like, instead of, like, saying, like, I'm a socialist, but if I'm talking to people who are normies or something like that, or kind of more not into engage in politics, I think if you kind of frame things more about democracy first, kind of.
I agree with this.
Where you're talking about.
I like that. What does that have to do with Venezuela and Elliot Abrams?
Well, like how the right, like, well, if you, like, Elliot was talking, like, when Ilhan Omar was grilling him, he was talking about, like, how great it is that he brought democracy to Nicaragua and Guatemala. And it's like, yeah, you killed, like, all these people who would vote against you.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's just Orwellian lies. But I agree in general. I actually think, I mean, I like to use the word socialist because I think it's an honorable, important political tradition. I think people need to not be children about reading Marx, and we need to overcome, red phobia in this country. But in general, yeah, I think things like post-capitalism and economic democracy, like, yeah, I'm with it. I think you're right.
I think, like,
we want to enlarge democracy.
Like,
they don't. I agree.
Like, in like a casual conversation about politics, like, I mean, I come from, like, a reactionary kind of background.
Yep.
And they kind of, like, are very good about getting to you where, like, it's very easy to go along with. You kind of already, like, you already see where it is. Like, I see on, like, the left where it's like, okay, you're talking about socialism. That's very easy to criticize with, like, the Soviet Union and stuff like that. But when you come up with, like, like, you put, like, democracy first, and, like, I'm just talking about, like, in a casual, like, workplace conversation.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. I think it's a good point.
This is why
I like it.
This is why I sort of often like in these contexts to collapse it to who's making this economic decision. Is it a capitalist just because he happens to own it, or is it a democratic process that decides?
I dig. Thanks for the call, Robert. I dig it.
It's always good to use the values of, dare I say, classical liberalism, the founding values of bourgeois democracy, against it. Because if you want to fulfill them for real, guess what? We need more democracy. We need democracy in the workplace, like freedom, equality, brotherhood. Like, why do you have to go to work 8 hours a day and you have no say in what you do during those 8 hours?
Well, that's actually, that's a very, how I read Marx, is like, it's a completion of the quote unquote enlightenment. And there always is, and there always has been right and left enlightenment anyway. So let's, like, defend that term and argue it on our grounds. And the point of Marx is that people are free-thinking, capable people, capable humans who should have power over their lives that extends to the economic domain. And so that just as you've been liberated from like the great chain of being of religion or monarchies and even politics to some extent, that democratization needs to apply to the economic sphere. That is actually the argument. And there's not, in that sense, not radical at all. It's just a continuation of what had come before.
Yep, those things, but for real.
Exactly.
Are you guys familiar with Dom Jolly of Trigger Happy TV? It was that Comedy Central show where he had like an oversized phone and he would scream into it like, "Hello, I'm on a phone."
Sounds good.
Google it. Trigger Happy TV is some funny things. But anyway.
I like this tweet that you
for
us.
Dave Rubin has a new animated project with PragerU, I'm guessing.
Speaking of classical liberals.
Speaking of classical morons.
Yeah, Rubin says, what is a classical liberal?
What is a classical
The
liberal?
Rubin Report's first animated project. And Dom Jolly says, primarily an easy way to spot a bit of cunt on Twitter. Sorry for the swearing, but I didn't want to censor it.
Is he British?
He's British, so he can say that.
That's perfect.
He's allowed to say it.
All right, final couple IMs of the day. Quam. Michael, just saw your convo with Hassan yesterday. Got a good laugh at the description of you in the video. It wasn't host of TMBS or co-host of Majority Report. No, it was Obama impressionist. That's actually pretty funny. That said, can I get I always direct the white devils into a circular firing squad. All right, you just got it. Let's see. Producer Lauren, I guess Jackie Schechter of Investigate Russia won't be on anytime soon. BBC News is reporting that Russia is currently interfering in elections in Madagascar. Note that, guys, come on. Look, if you really want, if we're talking about global election interfering, then that is where I'm going to have to be pretty firmly on the side of let's start at home.
Yeah. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, come on. I don't know whether you're joking. Note that, and then Bolsonaro, Russians help get. I'm sorry, I don't know if they.
Maybe it's all Putin.
Yeah, it's all Putin.
That guy gets around.
Yeah, Tomcat. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not on board with that frame of Russia. We need some bigger analysis. Russia's in Madagascar.
You know what's north of Madagascar? The Seychelles.
And what happened in the Seychelles?
Eric Prince.
Eric Prince. The year was 1976.
It's getting too easy.
It is. All right. The final IM of the day. What is it? We're good? What happens?
It appears that the screen is up instead of us.
Let's get the show up.
Okay, let's go. I'm just looking for the final IM of the day. All right, Jay Tingle, let's just give it to him. He got it. Let's see. Dopey hearing this AM in the House Judiciary. The Hill is giving Candace Owens for blasting Dems, but Ted Lieu counters by playing recordings of Owens defending Hitler's domestic policies in lieu of questioning her. Okay.
We'll play some of that tomorrow.
All right. Play some of that tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie.